Good evening all and welcome, and thank you all so much for being here. It means a lot that you choose to watch this channel. I have a chilling collection of scary stories in the rain for you to enjoy, but for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I lived in Astoria, Ravenswood houses in the 90s. I was friends with the mailman who was a really cool guy. His name was Rich. What happened after New Year's was crazy, and for a month I saw this man deteriorate into a killer. Rich was an all-round cool guy. He was good-looking, charismatic, and delivered the mail around our neighborhood. His baby's mom lived in my Project Sim Ravenswood house, and he would say hi to everyone on Christmas no matter how poor people were, and they often left him a tip in cash. Everyone liked him. But Rich had a dark side that involved a fight where he beat his baby mama and got a restraining order. He broke her orbital bone during an argument. During that year, his girlfriend would often walk about with 2 black eyes or a swollen cheek. He was beating her. He did not show up for 2 weeks because of some departmental procedure suspending him till they found out what the case was, and I saw him 2 weeks later. He was much less cheery. The new year brought him a child support garnishment for his kid, and legal problems, not to mention problems regarding custody. A few months passed, and I saw he had started staring into the distance in the hot sun, and did not look good. His long stares would be longer and longer, and it would take time for him to reply to his name being called. Everyone around the way heard he had broken a court order and beat his girlfriend again. He was no longer the cheery, charismatic man we knew, but something darker. He stopped saying hello to people. One day coming out from work, I see a Telemundo truck along with Eyewitness News Channel 7 and NY1 news vans. Rich killed his wife and 7-year-old and 13-year-old stepsons. Both heads were removed. The kids' genitals were found in their mouths, both of their heads in a closet. They lived 2 buildings down from me, and my friend was their neighbor. Cops sealed off the building. He tried to cut his wrists but failed, and was taken by ambulance. After detectives left the crime scene 2 weeks later, and everything was concluded, we snuck in through my neighbor who lived next door. All the action took place in the kitchen. It was like blood was dragged from the living room to the bedroom. The bedroom had a broken door, but we didn't go inside. This was before crime scenes came to clean up. I had nightmares for weeks. For a week, the boy who lived in my building, who was 7 and friend with the kids, became traumatized after he heard about his friend's death. His mother encouraged me to talk to him, since he looked up to me as a big brother, and I remember he asked me, "Why do people hurt children?" I could only say, "Because they're sick in their heads," and he cried in front of me as I comforted him. From that point on, I had trouble sleeping for a while. Going in the actual murder scene made things worse. I will always remember a blank stare when I joked around with him. It was like he was staring right through me. He is currently serving 3 life sentences. I recently moved out in the middle of nowhere. I was about 5 minutes away from home when I stopped at a stop sign to look for a lighter in my purse. I noticed a man walking towards my car from the tree line and immediately drove off. It was pretty late at night, and my closest neighbor is about 10 minutes out from where I am. It's all woodland and farms. There's no good reason the man should have been out in the middle of nowhere like that. I picked up my neighbor, who lives a few miles away, who had a couple of young daughters himself, and we went out to look for the man after reporting it to the police. We never found him, but there were footprints all around the tree line. I never got out of the car, but my neighbor, who was properly armed and protected, spent a good 30 minutes searching the area. A few months rolled around, and they found the guy living on private property, along with another man. They had been kidnapping young women for months. and eating them alive / selling them on the black market. They used an abandoned shed as a slaughterhouse and had meat hooks hung everywhere. They found a missing woman naked and locked in a cage, and authorities believed dozens of the missing women cases ended up there. It freaked me out for a while and still does. Being a woman, I'm usually extra careful anyway, but I definitely felt like this was a wake-up call to be extra precautious. I remember getting the Amber Alerts at least once every other week, all with the same description. Long brown hair, around 5'3", blue eyes. I have long brown hair, I'm 5'2" and have blue eyes. Really creepy. After this happened, I made a point to become very familiar with firearms. I'm originally from Chicago, so that's saying something. Crime in the city is predictable. Crime in the South is straight up out of a horror movie. I used to work at a summer camp. Usually the kids would go to bed by 9 p.m. at the least, so the rest of us would just hang out around the fire. One night one of the kids came to the fire pit, which was about 100 yards from the cabin, saying that she was having trouble sleeping because of the noise. So I walk back with her and make sure everything is good in the cabin, and come back to tell everyone to keep it down. Maybe 10 minutes later she comes back and says that she still can't fall asleep. I walk back with her again, and in my head I'm thinking that she's just being restless because we aren't being loud. But anyway, I make sure she's under the covers and head back to the fire pit. Just as I'm about to get there, I realize that I left my walkie-talkie in her room. So I head back there and see that she's sitting upright in bed with the walkie-talkie in her hand. I'm thinking, okay, whatever, and tell her to go to sleep. I head back to the fire pit, and the guys are like, "Why did you say that to her?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "We heard you on the walkie-talkie tell her that she would look better if she shaved her head. That all the girls look better with shaved heads." I never said that, but no one believed me. And it was obvious not her saying it either, since it was a grown man's voice. I rushed back to check on the cabin, and everything was normal. I'm a 39-year-old female, and my story took place when I was 15, but it feels like it was yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I am from a little village in Ireland with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbours or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky enough that even though the population was small and the houses far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friends and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village, and we were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we liked to do during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was to go downtown and look around the shops. The easiest way to go down was to get a hitchhike as there was no buses. Here in Ireland we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective, but back in the 80s and 90s it was common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules we had to follow. I'm not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. Rule 1. Never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Rule 2. Never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Rule 3. Never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back or worse, ropes and blindfolds. 4. This is the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they are going first. If you tell them where you are going first, they could pretend to be going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least, we tried to. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer, so we could go to town with a population of a few thousand and look at the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver, and as two shy 15-year-olds, this bit sucked the most. To make it far worse, we took turns sitting in the front, and one did most of the talking. One day we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. At around 3 p.m. we usually went to the spot where we'd hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town. We were only waiting about 5 minutes when a white car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him, and he said he was just passing through our village on the way to another. Rule 4, broken. But he seemed nice enough, and we just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it, had tattered pants, and smelled of cow poo. The cow was full of bits of straw, and old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on, and don't ask me why, but I noticed these things. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise. No, we reply. There it is again. Sounds like a banging noise. He said that, but we didn't really hear anything and just sat there quietly. Might be the exhaust. I'll have to pull in and have a look. He pulled up on a busy road and went to take a look. I didn't hear anything, said Mary. He seems like a weirdo, I replied. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I got a bad feeling from him. Next thing he does is come back to the driver's side and tells us that his exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road, and he needs help to tie it up. It was then I noticed he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt, and thought this was odd. He got some string off the boot, same colour string as his belt, and we both went to get out the car. Although I got a bad vibe from him, I didn't feel scared at this stage. We were on a busy road and it was around 3:30, so we both got out of the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used a rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it while he secured it with string. They were both kneeling while I just stood there and watched. It was then I noticed his flies were open, and I could see his genitals. He was clearly not wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on, so I figured I wasn't surprised. In my head I thought, what the hell is going on? Oh crap, but said nothing. I stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted shocked. Oh girls, I'm so sorry. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together. Must have come off. Forgive me, and get back in the car. Mary was stunned because she got a close-up of his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him it was okay, that it was an accident. So we go back to the car. He fastened the safety pin even though I didn't see him look for it. All was hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was now very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out our passenger window and repeated, "It's okay." Then he said something that turned my stomach. "Well, girls, you're taking it very well. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you'd liked it." Then he nudged me in the arm with his arm. Like you would a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye, still facing the window, when I noticed his fly was undone again, and he was exposed again. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Oh, sorry, safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look." Fine by me, I thought. "Okay," I replied, and continued to look out the window. He kept nudging me and saying, "Don't be looking, don't be looking," and giggling at the same time, like it was a playful joke. Mary began giggling too, because she laughs when she's nervous. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was getting angry at this stage. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking, and then he said, "Your friend is laughing, she must be enjoying the view." This made her laugh even harder. Now remember that we're both polite 15-year-olds and always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in my arm and my friend's laughter was all getting too much. He asked, "Is this the first willy you've ever seen?" I was turned facing the passenger window so much that I had my back to him. There's no way I could be looking. I lost my temper and shouted at the top of my voice that I'm not looking, and to Mary to shut up. Silence followed. He said sorry, that he was only joking, and I didn't need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv, but I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe that it was an innocent mistake. We all know it wasn't. We finally arrived to our tiny little village. We got out, and he said again he was sorry about the whole thing, and my friend got her voice back and assured him it was okay. I said it was okay and not to worry. I said thanks for the lift, and what he said sickened me. He looked me up and down and with a creepy smile said, "Girlies, thanks for everything," and drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal not to tell our parents or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got back her voice and repeated, "Pervert, sicko, smelly bastard." He'd planned it the whole time, over and over. About 5 minutes after sitting down on a bench, who drives going in the direction we just came from? Only pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling, while we sat there stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention. So much for just passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told our friends what happened. One day I told a friend of mine named Brid. A cousin of hers had told her a very similar story. The cousin lived on another village about 20 miles in the other direction of town. She was a few years older than us, and while hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John was really pervert John. So to the man who smells like cow crap, has worn clothes and used string to hold up his pants, and to the man who gets off exposing himself on young girls, let's not meet again. Several months ago, my cat went missing in the woods, and I had to look for him. It was late at night, and the moon was a thin crescent, so the only source of light was my flashlight. I had seen my cat several times, but he seemed to be scared of something. Every time I got close, he would run further away. At a certain point, he got scared of something and ran back towards the house. I started to make my way back and saw a man. He was just standing there, absolutely still. He had nondescript brown hair and a tweed jacket. I could make out all of his facial features except his eyes. They just seemed to be shadow. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Then I said, "I can see you, you know," and was greeted with silence. I turned and walked a few steps, and he turned around. He was a few feet closer. I turned, walked some more, and looked again. This time he was partially hidden behind a tree. I did not need any more warning. I booked it back to my house where my cat desperately wanted to come in. I locked the doors and sat on my couch until I calmed down. Every night since, I hear a noise at my window, a loud, slow, rhythmic tap. There's no trees out there, and most of the nights it's happened there's no wind. Every time I've been too afraid to look, probably for the better. The last thing that I want to see is the man with a tweed jacket and no eyes. This happened a number of years ago in early December. I was playing a mobile game for about 3 months prior. It's a fantastical medieval war type game where you level up your castle to get stronger troops and better defenses, and as you upgrade your buildings, it also features invading other castles after you played for more than 7 days. There are alliances formed where other players team up and work together on events. You can also edit your profile and change your picture, global chat, alliance chat, and private chat, and it's easily accessible to anyone. I got into it several months later than others. I discovered the game from an ad, and it was based off one of my favourite series, and since I've played similar games, I adjusted quickly and was recruited by one of the top alliances, which also is kind of infamous for its members being a bit too friendly with female gamers. I did use my own picture in the profile, but my hair was covering half my face, and I had an anti-dust mask on. Only my left eye was clear, and yet they still invited me. I'm not gonna lie, I had thought I might run into some pesky guys, but I still accepted anyway. It was just my third day playing, and I needed all the resources I could get to strengthen my castle, and getting into alliances is a surefire way to get donations early in game. Besides, every alliance is bound to have their rotten crops. Most of them were pretty okay. Their leader was really helpful, and while he would tease the girls sometimes in chat, he would stop when we tell them to, or he would sense we were getting uncomfortable. There was a handful that were straight up thirsty jerks. One guy said that girls were inferior to him, and another offered in-game currency to any girl that wanted to cyber with him. And what particularly ticked me off was this dude was claiming I was his property, even going so far as to spam the global chat to warn other players to not flirt with me or he'll destroy them. Sheer idiocy. He's a wallet warrior, meaning a person who buys in-app purchases. That also means free players like me can't exactly fight back with him and expect to leave a dent on his castle. The leader sent me a private message and apologized on his behalf and told me he can't exactly kick the jerk out of the alliance since he was a valuable player despite his insufferable behavior. The most I could do was block him and hope he stays in the alliance so he wouldn't attack me. He didn't, but instead he made dummy accounts and constantly sent me private chats. I was getting pissed with repeatedly blocking his accounts that I finally conceded to his condition for him to stop spamming me. That is, for me to unblock his main account. For several days he didn't talk to me that much, and when he did, he was actually polite. The leader told me he must have turned over a new leaf, but I wasn't convinced. But I didn't shut him out. That was when it got really bad. Thinking back, I may have been a bit careless when I was talking to the other players. There were female players, and I quickly bonded with them and made friends. Sometimes we'd chat in the alliance, just so that it would be lively in there. The conversations were random, but there were snippets where we wrote our information. Not the specifics, but I clearly remember saying my birth country and school I attended to. But the city, the street, the exact address, I didn't spill. So it was the first week in December, when a Christmas event was held in-game. By that time I was not bothered by the jerk, and we could even hold civil, albeit short conversations. I was talking with a female player when he typed in the Alliance chat, "Do you like flowers?" It was a random question, but I decided to answer, "I guess." A few seconds later his message popped up. "Do you like surprises?" Again, I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I didn't want to appear rude. Pleasant ones, yes. My friend had to go offline, and she said goodbye and sent me a virtual hug, since we can't hug for real. It's just sort of became a greeting for the girls in the Alliance chat. I almost forgot about the jerk, but then he wrote, "You'll be moved to tiers soon. See you. I'll give you more than virtual hugs." I was positively weirded out by his words, so I made an excuse to log out the game. It was nearing school break, and classes were pretty chill, so I was just hanging out in the library to have some peace and quiet. But then one of the working students, i.e. a close friend, tapped me on the shoulder with a quizzical look on his face. "Hey, did you snag a boyfriend without telling me?" "What? Why'd you say that?" I asked, not seeing the connection at this time. "There was a bouquet of flowers sent to you. It's in the department office right now." That's when it all clicked. All the random questions. That creepy endliner. He found me. I was panicking so bad to the point I had to go to the clinic and skip the rest of classes. I didn't accept the flowers, I didn't even want to see them. When I was asked what to do with the bouquet, I told them to throw them out. My username didn't even have any relation to my real name, and when I was asked for my name, I only gave them my nickname. It creeped me out how this jerk managed to find me. I was scared out of my wits and chatted to the leader about it, and he was shocked too. He then sent me screenshots of their conversation, of me, to which the jerk was doing most of the talking. The leader was sending clipped, dismissive responses, but the jerk didn't seem to notice. He was too immersed in his fantasies, horrible thoughts that made my skin crawl to this day. I told him I'm quitting the game and to apologize to the Alliance on my behalf. I don't want to worry the other players, so I had to make the leader tell a lie, and that I was getting too busy with studies and that I had to stop playing. I don't exactly know how he tracked me down, but I spent the rest of my semester fearing for my life. I didn't go anywhere alone. Heck, I rarely hang out with my friends. Fortunately, they understood after I explained the situation, and I graduated with paranoia clinging on my back. But even now, I couldn't get myself to play any games similar to the one where I unluckily met him. I was also extra wary to guys, especially strangers. After that flower incident, I didn't get any more surprises for him, and I hope it stays that way. And as for the jerk, let's never meet again. I'll start at the beginning of the worst day and a half of my life. Right now I'm a female at 31. At the time this happened, I had just turned 22. I got off work early from my second job. The cool breeze kissing my face, cooling me down as I drove up the long driveway. It was so calming. My husband and I at the time lived on this ranch that we also worked on. It was dark, desolate, and just had a completely different feel at night. The creatures of the night howling and chirping, the shadows of all the trees dancing in the headlights. Then there's our house, smack dab in the middle of it. The forest unraveling around it as far as you can see. I made it to my front porch, and something just felt off. I can't explain it, but I soon found out when I walked in there. They were there, on the couch, completely naked. The next hour was a complete blur of shouting, crying, and him begging me to listen. I just couldn't, not again. This was the end of us. I packed up everything I could in my small black Honda, spiraling gravel into the house, and sped back down the same driveway I had just not too long before been so serenely driving home on. It was about a 4-hour drive back to my dad's house, my safe space. I wanted my dad, reverting back to my 10-year-old self, longing for my dad to fix my proverbial boo-boos. I drove on, determined, into the night, and everything was going smoothly, until I was almost back to my hometown. You see, my gas gauge hadn't worked in a long time, and through the horrible situation I just endured doing laps in my head, and had forgotten to fill up before I left. The car started to sputter, and cut out in the absolute worst of places possible. I was on a 3-lane highway at 3 in the morning, and the only place to pull my car over was a tiny bike lane butted up to a retaining wall. I was screwed. There was no one on the highway at this time, and if there were, they weren't going to stop for me. I put my hazards on, but that was just a band-aid for the moment. A couple of semis had passed me in the 10 minutes or so that I had become stranded. They barely saw me in time to move over. They passed so close that my entire car shook. It shook so hard that the crack in my front windshield started to spread haphazardly across it. I was scared at this point, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I saw a car on the opposite side of the highway slow down and make an illegal U-turn across 3 desolate lanes. The small SUV pulls up next to my window. In the car were 2 young males in their teens, and what looked to be like their young girl companions. The guy driving asked me what happened. I gave them a brief rendition of the story, and he then offered to drive me to the nearest petrol station. I was hesitant at first, but quickly realizing my current situation, I reluctantly obliged. We made it to the parking lot of a Wally World, which I thought was odd. I dare not question it yet. I held onto my purse closely, trying not to draw attention to the nervous sweat beading down my brow. The driver then tells me his friends have somewhere to be, and they all but the driver just exit the car without rhyme or reason, leaving me alone with the young male driver. He tells me that he'll quickly take me to the gas station, and now a small sense of relief comes over me. Then quickly fades. Because I knew this town, I had grown up here, and he was not heading towards any gas station. The young man, which I did not get a name of, suddenly turns down a dark, dimly lit alleyway and just parks the car and says, nonchalantly, "Hey, I just need to park here for a minute and take my insulin," insinuating he's diabetic. It wasn't insulin. It looked dirty. It was drug paraphernalia. I've seen enough cops to know what they looked like. At that moment, my heart sank to my buttocks. I said to him, can you just take me back to my car, please? I'll figure it out. He didn't respond. Just then I caught a glimpse of two skinny men clumsily trying to duck behind a dumpster behind us in the alley. I was naive enough to bring this up to my unwanted captor. He said in a menacing tone, "I don't know what you're talking about, you're tripping, girl." I instantly went into fight or flight mode. I started telling him my tragic life story, like how my brother had killed himself, and I was all my dad had left. He even tried to shush me. I kept talking, told him about my cheating husband, and the fact that I just wanted to get home and be with my dad. For a moment he paused and looked at me, and then something clicked in his brain. Before I knew it, he was speeding off to the poorly lit alleyway into the scorching lights of the highway and the Walmart across the street. He screeched to a stop in front of my car, threw out my purse and a random half-full gas can from behind his seat, and uttered the words, which I will never forget, that are seared into my brain: "Don't ever get into someone's car you don't know. Now get the hell out of here." And he sped off down the highway, vanishing forever. There are so many things I wish I did differently, but thinking back, I'm alive, and it could have been much worse. I, for one, will never be the same because of it. I worked at a Boy Scout camp for 2 years in high school as a summer gig. A requirement for the Scouts is to earn their Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, and for this, they had to set up shelters along with other activities. Before I was staff, the Scouts would go 12 miles into the woods for their night out to a place called Shelby's Dream. The stories of kids waking up screaming, talking about seeing a ghost running at them and being hung from trees and other wild experiences were many. Everyone wrote those kids off and called them crazy. Eventually there were things people couldn't explain, such as staff members waking up with scratches and cuts on their body. The backstory of the place is that there was a mass killing of Southern soldiers during the American Civil War, and Shelby was the daughter of the Southern captain, who was hung with all his men. She supposedly came back to the camp to find her father and all his men hung from the trees. We stopped sending the group to that location a few years back. One night my cabin mates and I went out there to see if the rumors were true about that place. I heard voices, cries, and screams that echoed into the forest. There's a point where you cross a bridge, and once over the bridge the wilderness stops. The woods continue, but there's no noise for animals or insects. Absolute silence, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. In 2011, me and my family were at Darien Lake in upstate New York on a roller coaster called the Ride of Steel, like as in Superman. On the tracks there runs 2 trains, with 8 or so per train. They sit 2 people across and had lap restraints. I was on train 2, which was at the station. While getting in, I looked out at the coaster and thought I saw a falling blob just after the second major drop. I shook it off as I was wearing glasses and my vision is still trash. So we go around the track and stop just before the station. We are waiting and waiting, and my family wonder what's happening. We see the car in front of us is still occupied with the riders, with an empty wheelchair next to one of the cars. Now it was a packed ride, with long wait times, and every seat was full except one, in the car next to the wheelchair. After waiting about 15 minutes, they finally let everyone off but keep the train in the station. After 15 more minutes, they send the train and we pull into the station. The ride attendants are in shock and don't speak to anyone. Later, we spoke to some of the waiting guests who were in the line to ride the Ride of Steel. They said a man fell out. I witnessed the death of a guy on a roller coaster and didn't even realize it. The guy who died was an Iraq double veteran amputee who was missing one leg and most of the other. He flew out of the lap bar because he had no legs, and to this day people do not believe me when I tell the story, and my family barely believes me, as I was 12 at the time. I was never really afraid of gore or death, But in that moment there sits a feeling, knowing you witnessed someone's last moments alive, and that feeling is indescribable. I'm a 24-year-old female, and live in a very populated city where people drive a lot. I'm still shaken by this, and I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts. So the other night I parked my car outside, went to let my dog in my house, and went back outside to grab my stuff. It was around 6 PM and dark because of the winter. I get into the driver's seat, lock the car, and I'm sitting there for about a minute getting my stuff together, when all of a sudden I see a man walk from in front of my car to the driver's side window. He was holding something up to the window, and I automatically get extremely panicked. A few months ago, a man held a wrench up to my window in a grocery store parking lot where I was sitting with my roommate and I. But he saw the dog and walked away fast. It was a sketchy situation then, and a sketchy one now. The next few steps are blurry. I'm looking at him in a panic. He is motioning for me to roll down my window, and I look into the back of my car to see my dog's there to protect me, and realize she is not there, as I had just let her into the house. I do realize that I had the back windows both 75% open, and then a thought pops into my mind. I can drive away. My car is on. I shift the car into drive, and he reaches back onto either the window, the door, or the side of the car, and I begin to drive and he backs up. I pull into the street and almost hit another car, and end up pulling out and leave shaking. The next day I realized my landlord had a camera pointed at the front of the house to see if packages got stolen. I asked if he had clips from the night before, and he did. Too bad it was motion censored, so it only showed the moments when my car was pulling out. He walks away from the car, and he has a huge wooden plank or something in his hand, hidden behind his back, at least 3 foot. He then walked down one way of the street a little bit, turned around and went a different way. I wish I didn't even see the video now, because I was scared before, and even more so after. Now I know he was holding something there that could have potentially been a weapon. I'm very thankful I trusted my instincts. Someone on a neighborhood website that night said their car got stolen 2 streets over, so maybe he wanted my car, but I'm glad I didn't get to find out. When I was around 11, we went camping. It was the first time I did it. According to the schedule, we were supposed to listen to a person tell scary stories, but for whatever reason they never showed. So, as our final evening activity, we went on a night hike instead. The walk was pretty normal and actually quite fun, until we stumbled upon these cute little fairy homes built into a tree. We all looked at the tiny houses and noticed you could open one of the doors, so we looked inside and found what was rather spooky. It was a note saying back in 5. Now this may not seem that scary, but just you wait. We carried on and kept walking. Later on we stumbled upon a lake, and we looked across it, shining our light so that we could see, and saw something rather strange. Parked on the opposite side were a few vans and cars facing us. We were instantly spooked. And to make things worse, we started to see people walk around. You could tell something wasn't right, because even the teachers seemed to be scared and nervous. The doors of the van were open, and I believe something was inside, but I can't remember. Nevertheless, it scared us more and more, and soon after we left and headed back to the fairy/gnome houses. On our way back, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check if the note was still there. It was not, and that sent shivers down our spine. We left straight away, and for the rest of the night we wondered who took the note. I doubt it was one of my fellow classmates, because we were all looking at it, and I doubt anyone would have taken it. I service firefighting breathing air compressors, and was on a service call in the northwest of Pennsylvania. I was running a bit late, so it was dark when I left the fire station, as this was in February about 15 years ago. As I drove down this twisty rural 2-lane, I passed a Dodge Durango on the side of the road with its headlights on. It wasn't near any houses, just in a wide spot, so I thought maybe they'd broken down or gotten a flat. I slowed down and went behind the Durango to see a shape lying on the ground. I thought it might be a driver trying to get the spare wheel out from under the vehicle, but then I realized it was a man on top of a woman holding her down and apparently trying to strangle her. I had to drive about a quarter of a mile further before I found a spot to turn around. I was in a 16-foot box van, so I couldn't just do a U-turn in the road. I turned around and headed back. The Durango passed me, heading the way I had been going originally. I got to where it had been parked. The woman was lying there in the snow. I thought she might be dead, but as I pulled up, she sat up, then shakily got to her feet. She was probably in her 40s, very thin and in a skirt and an inadequate jacket. I asked if she was okay, and she just said, "I'm cold." I had to get her into the passenger seat of my truck and cranked up the heat. She sat there shivering, her body hunched forward. She had blood on her face and her fingers were red. She didn't say anything about what had happened. I pulled out my phone and surprisingly had enough signal to call 911. I explained what I'd seen and they dispatched a state trooper. It took 15 minutes for him to get there. The only thing the woman said was, "They're gonna arrest me." I offered her some napkins and water, and she wiped her face off. I didn't want to bother her, since she seemed to be in shock, so we just sat there in silence for a while. The trooper arrived, and she let out a designated sigh, opened the door and said, "Thank you for helping me," and walked over to the trooper. He spoke to her for a few seconds, then had her sit in his car. He came over and I explained what I had seen, and described the Durango. He thanked me and said I could go. A few days later, my phone rang while I was away from it. It was a restricted number, and the voicemail was from the trooper, thanking me again, saying that he may need me to offer some more testimony if I was willing. I never heard back from the police. I never found out what had happened. I think it was either a sex worker or a drug deal that went bad, but I never saw anything about it. A few years back, my friend and I were walking around the mall. We had to use the restroom, and the nearest one was this creepy isolated one towards the back. My friend would always tell me that the bathroom gave her bad vibes, but I thought she was just being paranoid. As we were heading towards the bathroom, a man passed us, giving us the creepiest stare. I turned around and noticed he was following us, so I quickened my pace and urged my friend to do the same. She was confused but obeyed, and I scanned my surroundings to see if there was a place we could hide or find a public place, but to my dismay there was only an empty backlot with a dumpster for him to potentially dispose of our bodies. I panicked and ran to the bathroom. Once inside, my friend asked me what was going on, and I explained and told her to put her weight against the door since there was no lock. A few seconds later, someone was trying to open it. I freaked out and pushed against the door so whoever it was couldn't get in. The person wouldn't budge and pushed harder. At one point the door opened a crack and I was able to see the man pushing against the door. I freaked out and called my dad while simultaneously keeping my weight against the door. What's funny about all this is my friend not freaking out and giggled at some points. She even suggested to go hide under stools, and I was so shaken up with fear and adrenaline that I called her a dumbass. Even funnier is when I told my dad, "Hello Dad, someone's tried to kidnap, come quickly." He was like, "For real? Are you sure? Alright, you got the door?" Damn, well, alright, I'm coming. Long story short, he stopped pushing and we waited a few minutes until my dad was there. We heard a hard knock on the door and for some reason it felt like it was safe to finally open it. It was a few girls standing there confused. They asked if we were okay since I was crying, and I told them, and they got concerned and described the man I saw, and I asked if it was him. They only confirmed it to me. Truly scary, and I'm glad we made it out of there. One evening, as I'm on my computer browsing Facebook, I happen to get a message notification. Thinking it's one of my friends or family members, as I have my profile blocked from people I don't know, I click the notification to open up the message. It's from an elderly man who doesn't live in the same town as me. He tells me I'm very beautiful, and I reply with a thanks and leave it at that. I should never have replied, because he immediately replies with, "Are you single?" when clearly in my profile picture there is my boyfriend of 3 years and I embracing. I tell him no, and he goes, shame. I end up blocking him and go to bed. The next morning, I'm opening and I'm alone. It's dark out, only 5 a.m, and I don't open for another hour. When I hear a, hello, you look beautiful as ever this morning. I turn around expecting one of my co-workers from the grocery store that my kiosk is placed in, and is just messing with me. But to my horror, the elderly man was there. He lives in a town that's about an hour and a half away from me, and the fact that he drove all the way down here just to see me terrified me. I told my manager about it. He asked me to go to the back room and would inform me when the guy was gone. It took a while, but my manager finally came for me. The guy, after I disappeared, ended up walking the whole store multiple times trying to find me, even asking associates if they'd seen me from Starbucks around there and he needed to talk to me. My manager quickly told the gentleman he was worrying his employees and that it would be best if he left before he had to call the police. Needless to say, he hasn't spoken to me, but I do occasionally see him lurking around the store. As a 14-year-old boy, I have experienced some scary things, but this has to be the scariest. This happened to me during the summer of 2019. On this day, I was headed to my cousin's house for a party. He told me that he also invited a family friend who he and I were close to, so I was fine with it. It was around 4 p.m. when I left my house. Herbert lives around 40 minutes away from me, so it was a decently long drive. It's good to know that Herbert lives at the end of a cul-de-sac, which is at the end of a street. On his right and left were neighbors, but in front of his house, there was only a forest. I arrived at Herbert's house around 5. I said hello to his family and the other people there. I then greeted Herbert and Abel. We decided to go swimming. Herbert has a big swimming pool in his backyard. We swam for about 3 hours, and after we were just chilling in his room playing video games and talking. Our parents told us they were going out and asked if we wanted to go with them. We all said no, so they left, meaning the only people that were home were me, Herbert, and Abel. About an hour later, I got the bright idea of ding-dong ditching. For those of you unfamiliar, it's when you go up to someone's house, press their doorbell, and flee, preferably hiding in some bushes or something to witness the hilarity of them opening the door to be met with no one. Since this story took place during the summer at 9 p.m, it wasn't all that dark out. We skipped a bunch of streets, then started ding-dong ditching houses. Each one gave a funny reaction. The next house we would go to, we all agreed would be our final one. A weird thing that we would do is play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would be doing the actual ding-dong ditch to the house. He did the last house, so it was between Abel and I. I ended up losing, so I went to ring the doorbell of the house. I rang the doorbell and ran and hid behind the car that was parked across the street. Abel and Herbert were hiding in the bushes near the car. I would have been hiding behind the bushes as well, but the bushes were further from the house, so I thought it would risk me being seen. I waited a good 2 minutes for the door to open. A tall man emerged. The man was white, about 6'5" with a beard. What happened next surprised me. As soon as the man opened the door, he ran in my direction, yelling, "Come here, I won't hurt you." I did what anyone would do. I took off running. The man kept repeating the phrase to me. That only caused me to run faster, and I ran so fast and far that I don't even know where the man stopped running, but eventually he did. I had my phone on me, so I took a rest from running so much when I received a call from Herbert. Here's how the conversation went. "Yo dude, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. This is crazy. The guy literally chased me. Meet me back at your house." I ran back to Herbert's house and entered his backyard through the side gate. Then I entered his house through the back door, locking it behind me. The adults weren't home yet. That never happened to me before while doing ding-dong ditching, so I was freaked out a bit, but I calmed down and told Abel and Herbert what the man was saying to me while he chased me. Abel tried to help us forget about it by saying, "Let's go watch a movie in Herbert's room." While we were walking up the stairs, we heard Herbert's backyard side gate door open and close. Abel asked the parents. I called my mum and they said they were still nowhere near the house yet. My heart sank. I told Abel and Herbert that my parents were starting to freak out as well. I went downstairs and screamed. Herbert and Abel both came and asked what happened, and I told them to look at the backyard door. There was a man wearing black, all black, staring at us through the backyard door. I could make it out to be the same man who had been chasing me, and in his hand I could see what appeared to be a baseball bat. The man tried the doorknob, twisting it until the lock kept on restricting it. He started laughing like a mentally insane person, then said to come out and play and that he wouldn't hurt me. We were all frozen in fear. I have never been so afraid in all my life. I said to the man that I was calling the police. It was a bluff, but it worked. The man vanished from the backyard door, and we hear the backyard side gate open and close. We quickly ran upstairs to see the man waving at us and running into the forest, never to be seen again. We promised each other never to tell anyone, and we didn't. And Abel and I stayed the night at Herbert's house because we were planning to go anyway. I still get scared to this day thinking about what happened. The man chased me for God knows how long and then showed up at Herbert's back door. There was nothing stopping the man from breaking the glass door and coming into the house. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he did, or if I just forgot to lock the door. This happened about 2 years ago, and is now a distant memory that I decide not to think about. I'm still chill with Abel and Herbert, but we obviously have not been ding-dong ditching since. I used to work at a summer camp. The scariest thing that's ever happened was during one of my stories with 15 campers around the fire. The other staff members working with me interrupted me mid-story, which I thought was for dramatic effect, to tell me to be quiet and listen. We heard some howls far away from coyotes, but we didn't worry about coyotes since they're usually so small and timid. As I began to tell the story again, no more than 15 seconds later, another 3 howls came from the state woods around us, just closer this time. This continued until it felt like the howls were only 100 yards away, when they abruptly stopped. At this point the kids had kind of panicked, and I was getting a little uneasy due to the proximity of them. But once again, I don't usually worry about coyotes since they're so timid. As we sit in silence, we waited to see what would happen. Not 2 minutes later, the calls started again, louder and closer. The first call came from around 100 feet into the woods in front of us. The second call came to our left, same distance, and the last 2 came from right behind us, around 50 feet or so from the fire, to the point that we could see the coyotes at the tree line. At this point, the kids are crying, and myself and a co-worker stand up to try and scare them away. The coyotes at the back entrance of the woods actually stand their ground and growl at us. So we grab the nearest logs we can find and howl back, chasing them away, and ended up chasing them through the woods and found their den the next day about 3 miles up a hill, filled with bird feathers and bones. Cool stuff happened working at that camp. I miss it. Nothing really creepy happened except for maybe a mountain lion call here and there, and some faint rhythmic drums in the woods that we heard. But we guessed it could have just been some kids, right? This happened about a year or 2 ago. I'm in the Alabama Air Force National Guard, but I work in a city in Florida. I'm traveling home for the weekend late on Friday night, since I had to be at my unit the next morning. I have drill once a month. I have been traveling for a while, and I am on a highway in Alabama near my parents' house. It's about 9 p.m, and there are no lights to light up the street. It's pitch dark, when I see a car stop at a stop sign about 60 to 70 yards in front of me, and he goes across the street I'm driving on. Mind you, it's dark and the car had his headlights on. When I go to the street he crosses, and I look down the street he went down, and there was no street, no cars, no lights, nothing. There was only grass and a telephone pole. I would have seen the red backlights at least, as I was going too fast for him to disappear before I got to him. I got out of there as fast as I could, and to this day I still cannot explain exactly what happened. I was talking to my parents recently about scary interactions I had while growing up, and they reminded me of one I've completely forgotten about. I was 7 years old and very naive, and believed whatever was said to me. I got bullied quite a lot in school, therefore leaving me with little friends, and decided to join an online game, Moshi Monsters if anyone remembers it. Basically, from what I remember of this website, you could make other friends and talk with them quite easily. My family only had one main computer at that point, so after school, I would often have to wait until my mum, dad or brother were finished using it so that I could play. I met a lot of people on there that I became friends with, and eventually I met Candy. Candy told me she was an 8-year-old girl, and we would spend hours talking almost every single day. It was a harmless online friendship, or so I thought, because again I was young and naive. One day, Candy asked where I live. I told her Canada. She then asked which county and city, so I told her. I thought she was just curious. Thankfully, she never asked my address, and I didn't give it to her. A few weeks later, Candy told me she was traveling to my city and wanted to hang out. So I asked my parents, and they were obviously very weirded out and concerned by this, so they decided to start reading our conversations. I never understood why. I chalked it up to them being overprotective parents. Candy eventually told me she was in my city and asked if she could meet me at the park by my house. First of all, since I never told her the area I lived in, I wasn't sure how she knew I had a big park by my house, but I also thought that maybe she just assumed there were parks in every neighborhood. She then said that we could meet by the ice skating rink, but she wanted me to walk there alone. My parents read this and flipped out. Our neighborhood is the only one with an ice rink in my town. My parents freaked out at me and thought I told this stranger my address, but I promised that I had not, and eventually they were able to read all our messages and can see that I didn't. Nonetheless, my parents were concerned. They had no idea who this person was or how they figured this out, so they banned me from talking to her. I was upset, but I obliged. After about a year, I had outgrown the website and was on new things. My family had planned a trip to Las Vegas, and we went. While we were staying there, I was really bored in my hotel room, and decided to check on how my monster was doing. I logged on to see hundreds of messages from Candy. Don't you want to see me? How could you ignore me? I thought we were friends. Mainly things along that line, until one message stood out. It was a few days earlier and it read, "I know you're in Vegas. I live here. Let's hang out. Just get away from your parents." I was shocked. How could she know? I hadn't logged into the website for a year. I was a kid and had zero social media, and it just didn't make sense. Again, I showed my parents and they were freaked out and basically banned me from the website in general. I never logged in again, or spoke to Candy again either. Some things are best left that way. When I was 18, I went with my sister to the rallies by our house. I always looked young, so I probably looked like I was 14. This random guy pulled up while we were outside eating and asked us where the library was. So I told him to just keep driving straight on the road he was originally on. That's when he asked me another question, where I worked. I actually told him where, but that I was actually about to quit. Immediately, he asked me if I wanted to work for him, but that we'd be traveling a lot, and he couldn't afford 2 hotel rooms, so we'd have to share. I politely declined, and that was the end of that. A year later, I'm walking down the same street, and the same guy pulls over and asks me if I know where the library is. I tell him to keep driving straight. He then asks me if I worked for him before, and I tell him no, and he drives off. I move away for about 3 years, and then when I get back, get an apartment about 3 blocks from my old house right next to the rallies. I'm walking to work on the same road, and the same guy pulls over, and we have the same conversation. A year later, I'm walking again, and he pulls up and asks me where the library is again. This time I bring up the fact that he's asked me where the library is 4 times in the past 6 years. He apologizes and then says that explains why I look familiar and asks if I want a ride. I tell him no and he drives off. 2 years later, I'm walking down the same street and he pulls up again and asks where the library is, and I bust out laughing and he gives me a puzzled look. I inform him that he has asked me this about 10 times. He apologizes and asks me if I worked for him before and I say no. He asks me if I want to, and I ask him what he'd like me to do. His work proposition was inappropriate to say the least, and I laugh and tell him to never ask me where the library is again. It's a really strange series of coincidences to happen so consistently throughout my life. Was it more than just a coincidence? What do you think? When my mum lived in Biloxi, Mississippi, and had just turned 6, she was on her way back from school and took a shortcut through a hole in a fence to get to the church for choir practice. But she got to the other side and was making her way down the street while carrying books. A car showed up behind her and began following her. My mum was already used to this kind of thing since it happened to her quite a bit, sadly. Noticing something was off and slowly turning her head to peek at the driver, the look at the man's face told her all she needed to know. The guy tried to grab her attention, but when she sped up her pace, he slammed the brakes and tried to jump out of the car to grab her. But she had already thrown her books to the ground and was running towards the church as fast as she could. He got back into the car and hit the gas to catch up, but she had already made it to the back door of the building, and as it turned out it was locked, and no one would open it either, since they couldn't hear her banging on the door. So she slowly went back up to peek around the corner to see if he was still there, and he was still trying to find her. Here is when she suddenly heard some music coming from the parking lot across the street, where they usually had some old circus-style looking wagons standing around. They were all splintered, rusty, their colours faded, and they were locked. But when she looked over there was a single one that looked brand new with its door open, and inside there stood a middle-aged man, who looked like he could have been Italian, who called her over with a waving hand and a smile. From afar, he asked if she would like a snow cone as it was such a hot day, and as he said that, he had stepped onto the top stair of the wagon and stared directly at the guy in the car. He literally stared him down, and because he did that, the guy took off. Meanwhile, my mum, albeit cautious, had just gotten to the front of the wagon and told the man, "I don't have any money." With a smile, he said it was free, and began making her a snow cone when her sister came out of the church to look for my mum and asked what she was doing. She too was confused to see this brand new looking wagon out there since there were never any before. He proceeded to ask her if she'd like a snow cone too, and then made her one as well. With their snow cones in hand and thanking the man for his kindness, they waved and said goodbye while he stood in the doorway and watched them return to the safety of the church. As they reached the building, one of the church members, who was kind of mean, told them they weren't allowed to bring their snow cones inside, so they had to turn around and go back to eat it quickly, but couldn't finish it fast enough because of brain freeze. But before going in, they looked up to see if the snow cone man could see them throwing the snow cones in the trash, but he was gone. And while the wagon was still there, the colours were now faded. It was splintered, full of spider webs, and was locked. No more music either, just dead silence. My mum said their mouths had dropped, and they ran over there to take a closer look. It really was nothing but an old, dusty, rusty wagon. After some speculation, her sister said it must have just been an angel, but she just froze and didn't say anything. When she told the church member about the man giving the snow cones to them because the woman had asked where they got them from in the first place, she told the two of them that there was never someone selling anything over there since decades and didn't believe them. My mum just told her that the leftovers were still in the bin. That woman then basically just told them to stop lying and making up stories and went back inside, and my mum looked at her sister, shrugged, and shook her head. I used to teach outdoor education, which was essentially just summer camp during the school year, and school groups would come up and spend a few days at the camp. On their last night, we would always tell them scary stories around the campfire. It was the same scary story every time. We worked in partners, so there would always be 2 staff members for every school group and make scary noises. So I'm telling the story, and every few minutes there's a snap of a twig or a rustle in the bushes. And of course, as always, the kids get all freaked out and they start getting scared. It's very fun. Well, as I'm telling a story, I'm walking around the campfire, looking at all the kids' faces, and I notice a familiar one, my partner Eric, sitting there smiling at me, wondering why I'm staring at him. My heart has never beat so fast in my life. Eventually I sped through the story and all the kids left, and I explained to Eric that I thought it was him in the woods, and his eyes got very wide and he said, "Are you telling me that it wasn't one of the staff members?" So we both ran back to the main road. When I was 20, I used to go driving around a lot at night. One time I was doing my usual drive around to no particular destination when I decided to go down this dirt road in the middle of nowhere in South Georgia. There was a cotton field on the right side and woods along the left side. It was like this for miles. Shortly after driving along the road for about a mile or 2, I noticed something hanging from a branch along the wood line. This branch stretched all the way across the road, nearly reaching the cotton field. What was hanging from this branch is stuck in my mind, even years later. It was a deer, but not just any deer. This deer had been mutilated. It was hanging from its antlers by what looked like towing straps. It also looked as though it had been beaten with blunt objects. Its body was filled with deep lacerations, and it was also nearly split in half horizontally. Its lower half was barely hanging by a thread. Still to this day, I have no idea what it was doing there like that. This happened to me in 2010. I was a college student at a school in a big city, which unfortunately wasn't in the best part of town. At the time, I was living in an off-campus apartment that didn't have dedicated parking spots, so I always tried to park my car along either side of the building under a streetlight. However, on this particular day, I was only able to get a spot on the street behind the building. Around midnight, I left my apartment to drive to my then boyfriend's house in another part of the city. He was a musician and just getting home from a gig, hence the late night meetup. I hated being outside the city alone at night, but I hadn't seen my boyfriend in a while and thought I could quickly make it to my car without issue. To get from my apartment to my car, I had to walk out the front door of my building, turn the corner, walk alongside the building, which was the length and width of a city block, and turn down the back street where my car was parked. All in all, this should have taken no more than a few minutes. As I turn the corner to walk alongside my apartment building, I see a man walking directly towards me. He immediately starts calling out to me and saying, "Hey, hey!" But he's far enough up the street that I think I can make it to my car before he makes it to me. I quicken my pace, and so does he. He keeps calling out to me saying, "Hey, can you help me? I'm homeless, I need to go home." Obviously that made no sense, and the closer he got, the more I could tell he was drunk, on drugs, or both. He was getting closer to me, and all the while calling out to me and asking for money, when I suddenly realized that I couldn't make it to my car before he would make it to me. So I stopped dead in my tracks underneath the streetlight on the side of the building. I always walked with my keys in my hand, so I would never be struck digging around for them in an opportune time. Much like this, and thanks to my mom and making sure I was always safe in the city, my keys were complete with a keychain of mace. By this time, the guy was a foot away from me, aggressively asking for money and telling me he needed to get home. I told him I had no money and couldn't help him, and he moved closer until he was inches away from me. I picked up my mace, and in that moment the streetlight shone on it perfectly, so this creep saw it and backed away. To this day, I swear I had a guardian angel watching over me. This guy could have grabbed me, snatched my purse, or gotten violent, yet the mere sight of my mace was thankfully enough to spook him. He quickly walked past me down the street, and I sprinted to my car and sped away, shaking, and needless to say, I never, ever walked to my car alone at night again. One of the most frustrating parts of this encounter is that it happened within sight of a city surveillance camera that wasn't functioning. A few months prior to this incident, someone tried to break into my car, and when I called the police and asked them to review the surveillance, they told me the cameras in that area didn't work, and hadn't for a long time. So I know there was no way this guy would have been caught either, which kept me constantly on edge. So much so that I moved out of the city entirely a few months later. A few years ago, I got into a car crash on the highway, and my car veered off the road into the woods before hitting a few trees. I was hit in the head pretty bad during this, but remember everything from the moment clearly. I was wearing a pair of sunglasses that my mother had bought me the day before, which had obviously fallen off, so my first instinct was to find my glasses so I didn't lose them. I spot them on the floor, and as I tried to reach them, a tall man starts knocking on the passenger window, asking if I'm alright. I look over, only seeing the body of the man as he wasn't leaning down and looking inside, and I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine, I just dropped my glasses and need to get them." Next thing I know, this man is grabbing me from under my arm and pulling me out through the passenger side door. He stands me up and says, "You'll be alright. Just walk out to the road and sit on the railing." Almost automatically, I start doing exactly what the man said without thinking, or even turning around to see what he looked like. I get to the railing and tell exactly what happened to everyone that stopped to check on me, including the paramedics and police officers. It wasn't until a few days later when I found out there was no man that helped me. The first people who stopped by to help only saw me either sitting on the rail already or walking to it to sit. They didn't see the man I described, and neither did the police or paramedics. I have a family member who really believes in spirits, and she believes it was my grandfather who helped me. He passed away 3 months before the accident, and thinks that the reason I blindly listened without thinking or even looking back to the man was because I already knew and trusted the voice. I personally have no idea what to believe, but I just know someone helped me that day.
Sophomore year of high school, a friend and I thought it would be fun to skip English class and go to the neighbouring town's school. Very rebellious and dumb. When we got there, we were unaware that the school was in lockdown for a random drug test. We walked inside thinking, I bet we'll just blend in and nothing happens. Turns out the principal was standing in the middle of the hallway. When he goes, "Hey, what are you doing in the halls?" My partner in crime ran into a bathroom and I ran to the car. I was sitting there, and suddenly I see my partner running to the car with the principal running after him. He jumped in the car and we sped off, and I noticed that a lot of students in the windows were staring at us like we were the reason for the lockdown, and maybe we brought weapons or drugs to the school or something. The principal was holding on to the back of the car. We got away. However, he caught the license plate from my friend's car, and a few days later we figured out that we got caught on the high school's security cameras. The principal wanted to sue us for trespassing on school property. However, he was too busy coaching the volleyball team to pay attention to the case. My parents were pissed, and I felt very bad about the whole thing, mostly because this was my first time skipping class, and it went absolutely terribly.
This took place back in 2016, when Pokemon Go first launched and took the world by storm. I had downloaded the game and was instantly addicted, so in the middle of this I went to my dad's game shop. He was set up in a place that was only really open on the weekends, but we had some business there during the week. So to pass the time I started up my game, figured I could at least get a few catches while I was there. When I started it up, I noticed there was a Pokestop about a 10-minute walk from my dad's store. Awesome, even still in the plaza. I let him know where I'm going and head out to spin it. I go back and forth a few times, spinning and heading back, and my dad doesn't complain as I'm actually getting some exercise for a change. I go back one last time and get my spin. I notice there's a large van nearby. I didn't really note it too much at first. The place was open during the weekends with more permanent shops available to rent, but it wasn't uncommon for shop owners to come by to check on things during the week, like my dad did. I get my spin, walk off, and the van immediately starts to drive out. I get a bad feeling and quickly head back to my dad's shop. The way the place was set up is there are multiple roads. If they wanted to leave, they would just continue down that one that they were on and circle their way out. So I made a quick turnaround on one of the smaller paths. Of course, they followed me down the road. Despite literally being minutes away from my dad's shop, I'm panicking a bit. I exit out the game, and I'm about to call him. Thankfully, by some miracle, the owner of the plaza appears in his car, excitedly asking me what team I'm on. We talk for a bit, and I'm grateful there's someone I know. I look and can see the van in the reflection of the owner's vehicle in front of me. Now, to all of those who thought maybe I was overreacting in this situation, that may be it was a coincidence. This will show you it wasn't. As I looked and saw them beginning to back up in the reflection, after they made it all the way to the road they'd turned from, I glanced back, noticing they had parked themselves back at the Pokestop again. I bid the owner farewell as he drove off, didn't bother to tell him what happened, and while it was helpful to get these guys off my back, he would have done nothing. Garbage like this happens all the time and he refuses to call police. I immediately get on the phone with my dad and keep him on the entire time, jogging back the last little bit. I tell my dad what happened, and he said I probably shouldn't go back there during the week. I agree. So to the people in the van, let's not meet. I went on a cross-country RV trip this past spring with my friend Melissa and her 7 kids and 2 young German shepherds starting in West Virginia, in a 20-year-old RV christened Big Betsy, and almost everything that could go wrong did. Among other things, the water lines broke the night before we had to go, so we relied on jugs for the entirety of the trip. The gas tank cap was busted, so it was a hell of a job to get it off. Tires had good tread, but a couple were pretty old, so they worried me. We found out the auxiliary batteries sucked, so we needed to jump-start them with a power supply every time we stopped. The main battery cable had a bad connection, so every time we started the engine, I had to stand in front and jiggle the cables while she turned the key. The slide jammed, and we had to get a pry bar to get in and out of it. Driving through Colorado Springs, we blew a spark plug out and had to stop for repairs. Luckily, her brother, who used to be a diesel mechanic, was traveling with us, and only took a day to fix it. Regardless, we were still having a great time, seeing the scenery, stopping at landmarks and national parks like Garden of the Gods, Mesa Verde, and the Grand Canyon. The furnace went out the night before we got to the Grand Canyon, and it got down to 17 degrees. I got up every hour for 10 minutes to heat the RV a bit using the propane stove, turned it on and off to rest, then did it again every hour that night. We went to Roswell, Las Vegas, then on to Malibu to see the ocean, and LA for a few days. Then we headed up to Yellowstone and were blown away not only by the park itself, but the drive there from California, through Utah and Idaho, just so breathtakingly beautiful. If you've listened this far, you've come to the point of the story. After Yellowstone, we had to leave from the west entrance, since the other roads east and south hadn't opened yet. We drove up into Montana, and for some reason her brother insisted on getting off at I-90 to a 2-lane highway through the Crow and Northern Cheyenne reservations. He was perpetually driving like an hour ahead of us because his RV was faster, and he's a bit of a reckless dude. But we didn't want to be far from him in case we ran into engine trouble, so we didn't really have a choice but to follow him. Even though I voiced much hesitation on taking a back road route in the dead of night through a reservation. So we find ourselves taking the ramp to Route 212 and had just gotten onto the Crow Reservation and stopped to gas up, and immediately things just feel odd. It's past 10 p.m, and as I'm pumping gas, I'm hearing children running around and playing off in the dark, and cars keep driving up to us slowly, checking us out. I get back in and Melissa is already saying, "Get us out of here, it's creepy as hell." So I do. We haul off down 212 in pursuit of her idiotic brother. Alright, he did save our bacon in Colorado Springs, so maybe idiotic is too strong. And there is nothing out there. Inky black skies, long, desolate roads, sporadic groups of 4 or 5 houses every few miles. I'm acutely aware that we lost self-service as soon as we got on that highway, so I'm just praying that nothing goes wrong. I try to ignore the acute feeling that something is watching us. Her dogs start to whine in their cages. The feeling of unease has continued and I really don't want to stop, but Melissa said we need to let them out to poop or we'd be cleaning up a mess. I pull over next to a big field and she gets her oldest daughter Ariana and Isabella to leash them, and I throw open the doors to let them out. As soon as they hit the grass, the 2 German shepherds sight something in the darkness and start going absolutely mental. They're barking and straining against the leash, and the girls are struggling to control them. My blood pressure spikes, and I look over at Melissa, and she looks completely bewildered. And I reach up to the overhead compartment and pocket my handgun, which I brought for protection. We get the girls and the dogs back in the RV, and peel off down the highway again, cognizant of the fact that we're probably going to have to clean up crap, since they couldn't go outside. They're back in their cages and continue to whine. I drive on for another half hour or so and they're still whining, and Melissa says we really need to let them go outside again. This is the last thing I want to do, because this whole time I've had this feeling that something is watching us, and I'm just running through my head all the scary stories I've read about evil spirits, wendigos, skinwalkers and all that stuff. And I reason with myself that I'm just scaring myself and they probably just smelled foxes or coyotes or something. And I really didn't want to have to clean up dog poo from the inside of the cages on some forgotten highway using jugs of water in the dark. We pull over again, and this time I take my gun with me, and I walk outside with the girls as they take the dogs out. I distinctly remember thinking, I don't know what good a gun will do against evil spirits, but I'm not going down without a fight. The moment their paws hit the ground, they immediately start to howl and bark into the darkness. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I'm looking at Ariana, and she has this look of terror on her face. I say to the girls, "Get the dogs back in the RV. We're getting the hell out of here." But her dog Hazel is straining so hard at the leash, and she can't get her inside. So I pick up this German Shepherd in both arms and have to heave her through the door and run inside. As I lean out to pull the door closed, I think to myself, this is the moment where something with sharp claws grabs my arm and pulls me into the dark. Thankfully, as I'm here writing this today from my bedroom and not the belly of a skinwalker, this did not happen. The dogs go back to their cages and continue whining. I jump back in the driver's seat and gun it down the road, and Melissa leans over and says in a panicked whisper, "What's going on out here? Don't you feel it? Am I crazy or does something feel really wrong?" I glance at her and remember one of the big no-nos of Skinwar lore. You don't talk about them. You don't even think of them if you can help it, because it draws their attention to you. I say, "No, you're not crazy, but I can't talk about it right now. I feel it too, but just trust me, we cannot talk about it now." As I'm cresting a small hill on the highway, I look over at her and say, "Just trust me, we'll talk about it later, okay? But we can't now." I look back ahead, and that's when I see it. This enormous white rabbit standing on its back legs in the middle of the road. Looking back now, with the benefit of a cool head, I'm sure it was just a bit bigger than normal, but I'm telling you at that moment it looked huge. It looked like it was 3'5". I swerve this 37-foot long RV around this beast of a hare, but thankfully keep control. I pull the pedal to the metal and say, "I'm sorry." if I don't care if the dogs have poo in their cages. I'm not stopping again. And I didn't, thankfully. And they didn't either. We made it to the town of Spearfish safely and stopped for the night. And after visiting Mount Rushmore the next day, we recounted the fear we all felt that night. And I told Melissa specifically why I don't want to talk about it. And she said, "Yeah, I knew why. I've read all kind of stuff about the Native American legends." And I realized later with a chuckle that maybe those spirits were real. Maybe they weren't. But if they were, they probably didn't appreciate me wearing my Cleveland Indians cap throughout their reservation. This happened in summer of 2008. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. You see, I live in rural western Pennsylvania. All you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh and Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably in an isolated forest too. My family did okay in spite of the economical depression area we live. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever made. You might think I was only friends with the kid because of the stuff he had, which honestly isn't true. He's probably in the top 5 nicest people I'd ever met. His family were amazing. They took me in for a while when my mum was in hospital, and I still keep in touch with them. So, rich, good guy, etc., who had lots of friends. His birthday parties were legendary among kids in our town. Usually they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projection inside, along with soft-serve ice cream machines and slushy. The party in 2008, when he was turning 13 or 14, was a little more low-key. There were a few less people than usual, and there weren't any tents and projectors. We played video games for the first part of the night, and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can be depending on who's playing, and my friend and I used to play like group hide and seek. The hiders would go hide somewhere dark, sometimes alone, sometimes together. If there was a great spot, the seekers got the flashlights and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the tree house as well as climb over some trees inside the yard itself. The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop drove by. Obviously we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to explain we were sneaking around the house at 11 at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a few miles down the road, has some wooded areas around as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's backyard, there's about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of it is going to become important in a bit. On this particular time, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide. We were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back to the house. They went inside, and my group, really confused at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening, and the story went like this. That round, they had all decided to hide in the woods, since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of places inside, but were still in sight of the house, looking farther inside the woods. They caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little time while figuring out what they were looking for in the dark. They thought it might be a tree or a deer or something, but they kept focusing on it. When they were sure that the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinted back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out, along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off to the woods to check the situation out himself. They stopped him and said that they should only go back to check as a group, or wake up his parents who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this pretty fun in a weird way, and it was like being a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low-crime neighborhood, and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. Even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare, and we came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring my friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever/collie mix, and was the furthest thing from a guard dog, unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid with the other walkie-talkie, ready to wake up my friend's parents or call the cops. I wasn't taking the situation very well, but really didn't show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside when I'm a nervous wreck on the inside, and at least I attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state as the original group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. This is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original group had done. It took a few minutes of searching since the figure had been spotted in the thicker brush that wasn't easy to reach. One of the kids swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something before yelling and running back to the house. Some of the other boys who had gotten the same glimpse inside the flashlight had behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare from behind the tree. It was at this point my friend's mum finally came downstairs after all the commotion. We explained the situation to her, and she locked all the doors and told us to stay inside and to tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that part of the woods were going into what was probably not their land anyway. They just had the closest house to it. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. We were situated on an air mattress in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one. Just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mum was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and hadn't seen anything amiss. We were all a little on edge, but things were pretty normal beside that. When my parents came to pick me up, I was reminded of the fact that I only lived about 2 miles from my friend's house, a walk that took 10 minutes or less. Even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while, just thinking about how easy it would be for the man in the woods to show up in my yard. Well, a few weeks later, I'm playing video games at my friend's house again, and I bring up the subject, and he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was pretty short with me about it. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his personality at all. He did come up with an explanation, though. Apparently, one of the neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall with long hair, and my friend explained that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that the kid had seen us playing hide and seek in the woods and wanted to scare us. That did make me feel a little better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there was a good chance that actually happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when someone is trying to scare you, there's like, haha, I got you at the end. Most people would want to reveal the whole thing in a good-natured way, or they just want to show you how dumb you look for nothing. Back when we had the sleepovers in our tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping his head to see if he scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident, and the person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, whereas his only pleasure was knowing that he had scared us. Or if this kid really did have problems, maybe he didn't understand how the pranks were supposed to go. His explanation also brought back an early memory of mine. I'd been going over to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friends and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yard. We played a game of basically dodgeball with moldy apples thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It was absolutely nailed to my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside where his parents asked me what was wrong, and I told them about the game and the neighbor kid. When he finished crying, his parents scolded him, that they'd warned him of this. They just said the neighbor's kid was not nice, and for the record, he did not have long hair. But this was a number of years prior. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on, which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not amongst the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was worried that I wouldn't come round anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time I had a sleepover at his house, not because of the incident, but because we were entering high school and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, and that makes it pretty creepy on its own. The alternates are even more frightening, and I don't want to think about the kind of guy who stalks teenagers in the woods at night. My dad was in the car with his best friend and the friend's daughter driving on the motorway. The daughter is diabetic, and during the drive she started to show symptoms that she was running low on sugar, except my dad and his friend had gone without any snacks for her. They start to panic looking for a place to get off the motorway. All the while her symptoms start to get worse. It gets to the point where she begins to have a panic attack. I don't know why they stopped, but they did. There, on the hard shoulder of the motorway in the middle of nowhere with a young girl hyperventilating, which makes her symptoms worse. And then out of nowhere, a stranger shows up. Just an ordinary guy walking along it. He walks right up to the car, hands my dad's friend a chocolate bar, and walks away without another word. They gave the girl the chocolate bar, and sure enough, she begins to feel better. But when they look back down the motorway, neither my dad nor his friend could see where the guy had gone. My dad is religious, his friend is not. And even so, they both agreed that something supernatural had just taken place. One time I had been at my local Walmart and smelled a foul stench. I turned my head in the direction of said odor, and there was an elderly man far too close for comfort. He was breathing very shallow, with his feeble-looking hand stretched out towards my face. I quickly moved aisle, as I heard what sounded like grunting behind me. He was attempting to follow me, but from the look, he was far too slow. I was obviously spooked, so I quickly made my way to self-checkout and began to ring up all my items so that I could get the hell out of there. I didn't see this man anywhere, so I figured maybe he thought I was someone else, or maybe he had suffered from dementia or something. I forgot about what had happened by the time I got home. Now, out of my mind, I unloaded my minivan, then took a shower and got situated. You know, the usual. My dog started barking profusely for some reason, and my mind immediately jumped to the thought of the old man, but I didn't see anyone or anything. Later that evening I went to check my mail, since I had forgotten it days earlier. As I reached for my hand in there were dentures in my mailbox. I threw them across my lawn and scurried inside. I secured all the locks of my house and called my friend, who thought I was tweaking. She got there and I showed her the dentures on the lawn. She thought I was playing with her. The night continued. Everything was normal and nothing odd happened. She left the next morning, and I took my dog on a walk. Down the street at the library on a bench sat the old man. He smiled and a few of his teeth were missing, in the exact same spot as the dentures. He started yelling to me about how I was doomed to go to hell, how I'm Lucifer's wife, and began to run at me, this time much quicker than at the store. Luckily, there was a librarian at the window who called the police. The man was on the run and had a warrant for his arrest for possession of indecent images of underage minors and aggravated assault on a minor of a sexual nature. He was on the local registry. I really hope he was put away and in a position where he can't harm anyone else.
I'm a 32-year-old male, and I was in first grade when this took place. It's a famous story in my family. Growing up, I hated school for many reasons, and one of those reasons was that I was always the target for bullying. Admittedly, I was a weird kid. I would talk to myself, blurt out random lines from movies completely out of context, and the slightest insult would send me into a rage. My bullies got a real kick out of this and would make fun of me every time to get a rise. The teasing would only end once I started pummeling them. And this story is about my very first bully called Ajax. It began one day on the bus heading home. I was talking to a girl I liked at the time called Diana, when suddenly the skinny blonde kid who was about half a head taller than me leans over his seat behind me and says, "Dylan's the Millins a baby." Now, any of you know what a Millins is? Yeah, me either, but the na-na tune was enough for me to turn my head and make it red. And being called a baby didn't help either. And before I knew it, I started fighting back against my bullies. So I just screamed at him over and over for him to shut up, which of course he didn't. Then Diana started yelling at him to shut up too, which only made him laugh. Now I should also note that Ajax lived just across the street from me. So this merciless taunting continued even after the bus pulled up at my stop. The memories of this part of my life are so vague. I'll jump to a few days later. I was playing outside when Ajax and his friends cornered me and took turns pushing me and calling me names. I yelled at them to stop, because it worked the first time, but they carried on harassing me. I lost it, grabbed an air pump and began swinging it at them. And I actually managed to chase them a few blocks before I turned around and went home. But now for the meat of the story. 2 days later I was playing outside again, when Ajax starts making fun of me from across the street. I don't remember what he said, but I walked over to give him a piece of my mind, and as soon as I got close to him, he grabbed the toy I had been playing with out my hand, hard, which in hindsight wasn't a smart thing to bring, and threw it up onto the roof of his mum's garage. Furious, I went to grab him, but he turned and ran. I chased him around to the backyard, and when I turned the corner, I stopped in my tracks. I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw. There, tied to a tree and crying, was Diana. No joke. Ajax stood next to her laughing. To this day, I don't know what he did to her. My shock was swiftly replaced with the fury of a demon, and I grabbed the sharpest stick I could find and lunged at the laughing idiot. He caught my wrist, and we grappled for a while, me snarling, him laughing. As we fought, he knelt down and reached for a yellow water pistol lying on the ground. I stomped on his hand and somehow managed to drop the stick, and gave Ajax a shove. Turned and ran to the front porch, where I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I could find, a metal canteen, and then hid myself and waited. After a long, silent minute, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. When I saw it was Ajax, I swung the canteen as hard as I could down on his head, and without waiting to see what would happen next, I ran back to the backyard, untied Diana, and walked her home. I won't lie, at the time I was feeling like a superhero, until years later that I learned from Ajax's mum that I had actually knocked him out cold and completely ruined the canteen. We only fought one time after that. It was about a year or two later when he started giving me crap again. I grabbed a fake sword that I had made by removing the plastic blade and replacing it with strips of metal from my dad's shed, and went across the street to teach him a lesson. He grabbed a chain and we circled each other in his driveway, swinging at each other and exchanging insults. Thankfully, one of the adults, I forget who, saw the fight and broke it up before one of us got seriously injured. After that, we actually slowly became friends, though it was still a bit weird when we hung out. Once he tried unsuccessfully to get me to eat dog crap, and another time after that he moonied me when we went swimming in his pool. But aside from that, we got along okay. We played video games and even made a movie together in which I played a goblin, his sister a princess and he the prince. Sadly though, the very last thing I heard from Ajax was that he threw a dart at his mum's head and ended up in a mental institution. His mum survived, but I have no idea where he is to this day. Not the scariest story. After all, I was only 6, and seeing my childhood crush bound and crying on my bully's property was an experience that will stay with me until my dying day.
I'm a motorcyclist and was driving my way down from my girlfriend's house. It's about a 20-minute ride, but it was 3 a.m. and the road goes through a forest without any streetlights. So I ride through the forest, already giving everything to my little 50cc dirt bike, when a naked mannequin is suddenly visible on the side of the road. I saw it appear in my headlights and drove by it doing 60 kilometers an hour. It was scary as hell. A mannequin standing there naked on the side of a dark road in a forest at 3 a.m. in the morning. Damn. I'm sure if any one of you would have passed it in the same situation, you'd have all got shivers too. When I was 19, I merchandised perennials at Home Depot in the garden section. It was mid-June, so there was a lot of product to cull, organize, and rows of racks containing flowers that had to be put out. I was finishing up one day, sweeping the concrete from the mess I'd made, when this old guy in his early 60s walks up to me uncomfortably close. He said something along the lines of, "Well, you're a strong, hard-working young man." I wasn't paying much attention to him, but still trying to be polite while clearing up so that I could be done. He kept saying weird stuff like how good of a work I was doing and how strong I am. At this point, he had one hand on my shoulder and the other gently on my stomach. All I could think of is, there's no way this guy's doing this. He then pointed to the rack of perennials that lined the aisle. "Look at all these flowers. We need a big, strong man to put them away." I kid you not. Not only did he pause, but he looked down at me while he did it. I scrambled away from his touch, laughing awkwardly because I was pretty much still a kid, but I wanted to throw up. I just kept walking and asking myself what the hell just happened. I could see him from the corner of my eye. As I swept, he was just standing there watching me. I looked up to meet his gaze, and I just glared back until he looked away and left. I was scared to leave Home Depot that day, paranoid he'd follow me. Every old guy I saw after that, I was hyper-aware of for a while. As a male, you don't think of it happening to you, so you never realize how disgusting it feels. I was working at a gas station the graveyard shift. Some guy runs in all tattered up, sweaty and exhausted, and frantically asked me, "What is today?" I told him the date and he's like, "No, the year." So I told him and he yells, "Oh crap," and ran out the door. I thought it was a prank or something, so I didn't give it a second thought. Moments later, I opened my phone and all my contacts were as they were months ago. My wallpaper was back the same and my icons and my ex back in my phone. Her parents, her siblings, her old friends from school. The only thing that didn't come back were my picture and texts. But all those contacts that I knew I deleted soon after I broke up with her, which was 5 months before this happened. I don't believe in a lot of supernatural stuff, but I often wonder, what if the guy was a time traveler and he warped too close to me and it somehow affected my phone? Far-fetched, I know, but even so. I was 16 at the time of this event. It was 1986, in Indianapolis at Union Station. I think it was around Christmas time or right after. My mum, 2-year-old sister, and 21-year-old uncle were there and visited together. Uncle still lived in Indianapolis, and we had moved to southwestern Indiana at the time. My mum, baby sister, and I were getting ready to leave and drive back home. I'd already bundled up in my coat, scarf, and gloves, and it was getting hot inside Union Station. My mum, God rest her soul, could talk a dead man back to life, so I was waiting for her long-winded wrap-up. I told her I was getting too hot and was going to step out for a minute. My mum nodded her acknowledgement, and out I went. It was cold, but not too bad. No snow, nor wind, just perfect to cool down from being overheated from being inside, but not wanting to play the on and off again game with my coat and other winter wear. Bear in mind I was 16. If this were to happen to me today at 53, things would have gone much differently. I was always a polite kid, almost to the point of being docile. I was always apologetic if I thought I'd screw up in any way. So, not even a minute or so after standing outside, right by the double doors that served as an entrance and exit, a white Chevette pulls up, with two big dudes with crew cuts just sitting in the driver and passenger seats. They were at least 6'5", probably 200 to 80 pounds each, and I figured they were probably from our local fort with the crew cuts, but that was just an assumption due to my family's military service history. Immediately after seeing me, they stop at the curb, roll down the window and smile. "Hey, come here, we want to talk to you." I, being 16, and now just realizing what this looked like, apologetic instead of alarmed, I looked up and saw the incandescent streetlight burning above me. Looked at both of them, with a typical apology saying, "I'm sorry, this isn't what it looks like." My poor mind was reeling with, great, they think I'm at home. More so than actually thinking I may be in a dangerous situation. They kept reiterating that they just wanted to talk with me. I kept explaining that this isn't what it appeared to be, and that I apologize if I gave off the wrong impression. It wasn't dawning on me in my embarrassment that they weren't listening to a word I was saying at all. All of a sudden, a passenger gets out and starts moving rather quickly towards me, looking like an alpha wolf staring at a T-bone steak. The switch was immediate, if not only him but myself. I was no longer apologetic and I was no longer embarrassed. I was pissed. "You don't have to get in your car if you just want to talk to me. I can hear you just fine." I'm normally docile and quiet, but the Irish and Scandinavian side of me came out in full force. I bolted inside where Mum was still yammering, and upon seeing me, she and my uncle were alarmed because seeing my family again drove home the fact that I didn't think I'd see them ever if he'd have got me in that car, and I was shaken. I told my mum what happened, and my uncle asked what were they driving. I told him a white Chevette, and Mum yelled for him to get them. As he bolted to the door, he ran 5 to 6 miles a day. Mum was livid, but I could tell my baby sister was getting scared, so I tried to calm her down. My uncle came back a few minutes later, winded and worn out. When he caught his breath, he said he caught up with them at a stoplight and made a move towards their car, but the light turned green. Well, that ended our little Wally World trip, and back home to southwestern Indiana we went. The moral of the story is, don't let manners supersede your safety. Who wants to die for being polite?
I was a tutor for an elementary school, where I would pull out advanced reads and conduct a book club sort of thing to encourage kiddos that were ahead of their classmates to still find interests in reading. This was around the time when school shootings were getting really rampant in the US a couple of years back. So I'm there alone with 5 third graders joking around and having book club in the empty classroom I was allowed to use, when all of a sudden an alarm goes off and an announcement is made that there is an active shooter on campus and that we must lock our doors and conduct active shooter protocols. I lose my mind. I usher the students into a little coat closet out of the view of the door, lock the door and flick off the lights. To make it worse, me being a stupid college student at the time, I never had my phone charged. I send as many texts to loved ones as I can, trying to not alarm them, but letting them know I love them, and something is happening at work before my phone dies. The students are also afraid, and about 30 minutes pass, and I hear footsteps outside of the door, and quite literally stop breathing, but they go past. I don't hear any shot or anything. Another half hour passes and I realize I should call the front office to see if they have any updates. My brain goes stupid during emergencies apparently, and I forgot that classrooms have built-in phones during my panic. They answer like nothing's wrong, and I say something like, "Hi, I'm a tutor here, and I have 5 students with me in room Y. Is it safe to come out? Are the police here?" The woman doesn't answer for a little, and as dead ass says, "Oh, we didn't make an all clear announcement? The drill is over." I was so close to tears I just hung up. Then an announcement was made that the drill is over. Nobody thought it would be important to let an outside school contractor know about a drill that very well could have been real. I swear I could have wet myself.
When I was 19, I was driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking crap and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us have heard of, despite both living in this town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to go see where the road went, and she said yes. So I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road, with heavy trees on each side and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like this at the time anyway. Within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off, and a few minutes after that I start to get this uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of a road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got this distinct impression it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is gonna sound stupid, but can you—" She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that, because we were stubborn and didn't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour. Besides, my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped twice over, 30 minutes of music on each side, between pulling on the paved roads and coming to a sign saying dirt road ahead. By this stage I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest 3-point turn I was able to and head back down the road. The closer we got to the turnoff, the better I felt, until we were back on the main road, where I felt like I could breathe easily again. We told a few people about it and got brushed off by most. We didn't even drive past that turnoff without flinching or shuddering for a few months. The feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and says, "Let's drive it during the day." So we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap, with the emergency numbers punched in, and we're playing upbeat pop music trying to keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the hell out of there, and have never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night, but I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if someone mentions the area of the signpost, we shudder. And recently, I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road where—" "Yes, and I don't want to talk about it," she'll reply. This story from when I was much younger, was at least 7 years ago now, is when I rented a room in a house. I had 4 roommates. Coming home from work, I would always find the stove on, and everyone would deny using the stove. There was a bunch of us, so it's quite likely that one of us just kept forgetting, but we could never figure out who. We joked that it was a haunted house, but we all thought someone was just a little bit drunk or whatever when they left it on, or just forgetful. Anyway, this event keeps happening, much to everyone's annoyance. Well, one night I'm standing in the kitchen with them. We're just having a chat, when suddenly we hear a noise over by the tap. We look over to see water start spewing out at full blast from the kitchen tap. As you can imagine, Shock and dread filled our bodies as we rapidly turned the water off and fled the area. Safe to say we figured out that it may have just been paranormal activity that was causing these strange events to happen in our shared home. Safe to say, I moved out very quickly after experiencing it firsthand.
I was attending this boarding school that was over 175 years old. I was entering 6th grade and moving into the dormitories above the school infirmary. On the first night, when settling in, I was by my desk and looked out the window to see this really young boy, pale and glowing. What was strange was that he had a cape tied to his neck, slick hair with a short sleeve button-up shirt, shorts and bowling shoes. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me since he wasn't too far from the streetlight. As I'm looking at him, he looks up at me, waves and walks away while vanishing into the night. I told my roommates and they laugh at me. Fast forward in time, I'm now in the 9th grade and was going to this alumni event where we talk to alumni and look at memorabilia. I'm going through old Lettermans, baseball leagues and other things on display when I come across an old picture of the same young boy with a friend. I could recognize him immediately because he looked exactly like the same ghost that I saw a few years back. The picture was taken during Halloween, which explains the cape. I was so shaken up about it, I had to leave the event for a moment. According to one alumni, the little boy died in a flu outbreak in the infirmary that killed a lot of students in the early 1900s. His friend, also in the photo, survived, graduated, and donated the photo along with other tokens to the collection. I've heard many ghost stories about spirits who pass through and haunt the old dorms. Also, many of the buildings are basically relics, so I'm surprised that I didn't see more ghosts on campus.
When I was 6 years old, I was at a park with my friend, Fred, along with our parents. I went up to my mum and explained that I needed to use the restroom. She asked if I'd bring my friend with me, and as we're walking to the restroom, Fred stops at the water fountain for a drink. I continued inside and immediately stumbled upon something strange. A large man was in the restroom but not using it. I stood by the doorway a bit confused. He looks at me straight in the face and says in sickly sweet tones, "I won't hurt you." I sauntered past him into the stall and began pissing as fast as humanly possible. He gently touches the stall door, pressing against it ever so slightly while still repeating, "I'm not going to hurt you." I'll never forget that guy's voice. Now finished, yet somehow crapping my pants, I slammed the door open to see him waiting for me at the sink, now silently staring. I try to dash past him, but he lunges and was able to grab the collar of my shirt. By this time, my friend cracks the door open to look inside to see what's happening. My collar is released and I sprint with Fred back to the playground and tell my mum what happened hours later. Her expression in reaction was so strange. I can still see the strike of anger met with a sense of fear. This happened in Sydney, about 2013. I was driving through a factory area early in the morning to get to the airport. It was still dark, and there were no other cars on the road, when we see a huge, tall figure just start to casually walk across the 4 lanes. As we drove closer, our lights shined on him, and he slowed down even more and just glared at us, and kept walking forward. My boyfriend yelled out loud as he rolled to an almost complete stop. And as my eyes focused on the man crossing the road, I noticed the swastika tattoo on his shoulder, among others. The combat boots, the camo pants, and his hands were balled into fists. It was bloody terrifying, and the way he confidently slowed down and turned to stare at us as we drove towards him. I honestly felt like we could have hit him with our car and we would have bounced off him. It took a good 5 minutes before we spoke about it. It was just so unsettling, and the first time it ever dawned on me that people like that lived in my city. I still feel extreme shock about this whole thing when I realized he was for real, and his confidence was terrifying. I got the feeling he could be a person that would cause extreme violence with no cause and continue on as if it had never even happened. I didn't think those people really existed near where I lived, outside of documentaries. When I was 21 and booked my first solo trip to Berlin, a foreigner asked me to snap a photo of him on the Christmas market. It was around 8 p.m, which was already dark as hell in Germany for December. Naive, I agree. No spot was good enough for him, so he asks me to take it over there, in a darker, more empty spot several meters behind the booths. I get a weird gut feeling. The phone he hands me is at least 10 to 15 years old, with those crappy 2-megapixel cameras. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, let myself be led away to the spot he wanted, and the second I placed myself in front of him and opened the camera on his phone, 3 other guys in each direction and me in the middle of them jumped out. My gut told me to look up from the camera. The second I see them coming towards me, I drop the phone and run. I had to go a good 100 meters until I'm back in the crowd and look back at the guys who were all just staring at me, not talking to each other, and not mad I dropped the phone or anything, just silent stares. I disappear into the crowd and catch the next train back to my hotel. For all I know, they probably wanted to kidnap, murder, or do something worse.
To preface this, I'd like to say that my school is regularly featured on both national and local news and internet for the amount of ridiculous stuff that happens here. Riot, food fights, incidents where the girls' nude pictures get spread, Cypress Bay, anyone? And finally, a full-on bomb threat. My school has a fairly large campus, one large 2-story building comprising the entire arts, science and sports departments, the lunchroom and administration offices. Another 2 large-story buildings that house the media center and hundreds of classrooms, followed by a third 3-story building and 50 portables. This makes covering all school grounds time-consuming and very dangerous. So when there was a bomb threat in my freshman year, we were locked down for over 4 hours while the SWAT team scoured the building accompanied by police dogs and armed with M4s and 12-gauge shotguns. We were told to sit against the wall on which the door was because there was also a report of a possible gunman. I was honestly terrified. I saw the police and SWAT team run through the bathrooms in front of our class, and thoughts of running off campus into my house were inundating me. I lived in the neighborhood across the street, a 60-second dash that could get me to safety. In the end, they found out it was a fluke, and it was all staged by one kid that faked a bomb threat to avoid taking a test. Idiot didn't even get suspended.
This happened when I was 14 years old, and I was fishing up in Alaska. My father works for United Airlines, so we'd fly up there on standby for cheap every summer and go fishing for silver salmon. There was a car crash at a river we were fishing at, and a lot of police were around. After a little while, a police officer came over and asked me to please stand up and fish on the other side of the river. It was a bit of an unusual request. I had been sitting on a log covered in a tarp that someone had presumably left while fishing there earlier due to the fact it had been raining that night. Turns out I wasn't sitting on a log. Once they pulled the tarp off, it was actually the driver's body. A very creepy experience. This takes place in 2017. I was born in the year 2000, so I was around 17. I worked at a popular chain restaurant as a hostess. We had a high turnover rate, so we constantly had new people working there. The bar was pretty low on who we would hire. Anyway, One day this guy comes in his mid-40s, probably around 5'9" and of average build. He had a small gap between his teeth and had emotionless eyes, dark grey/brown hair and a bit of a comb over. He's wearing an Hawaiian-style button-up shirt and khaki cargo shorts, and asks to talk to the manager, Michael, a good friend of mine. After about half hour of talking, the man shakes Michael's hand and leaves. We joke that he looks like a stereotypical serial killer. He had no job background to talk about really, just that he's from California and he was a male escort. He's having a second interview on Tuesday, so I guess we'll see what happens. Michael informs me. We both made jokes for the next few days about the serial killer co-worker we were sure we would soon have. Even after he was hired, it was a running joke amongst everyone. His name was John. On the surface he was okay. Maybe a little inappropriate at times and touchy-feely with the girls, including myself, but everyone thought he meant nothing by it. Looking back now, it's weird how we let him get away with borderline sexual harassment. I can recall several times that he grabbed me by the waist, called me sexy, and made sexual noises as I entered the room. I was only 16. I had only been working there for about 6 months. I had become close with most of the staff at that point, even the new guy John. He was a little weird to everyone, but especially to me. It was like he had some kind of fascination. In the back of my mind, I thought I should stay on his good side, just in case he was as creepy as he acted. So when he invited us all to a barbecue at his house, I went. I didn't want anyone to have a reason to dislike me. Maybe it's because I'm a people pleaser, or maybe it was the feeling in my gut. It was me, Michael, his girlfriend, and their 3 children, and Justin. John told me to go there at 4, so I did, and when I arrived I realized I was the first to be there. I always get to places early, so I figured everyone else should be there soon. He lived in a nice enough neighborhood, and from what it seemed he was pretty well off. Nice house, 2 cars, a boat even. I'm greeted by John at the front door, who welcomes me with a hug and asks if I can help cook the burgers, as he was vegetarian and didn't know how. I thought it was a bit weird, but figured he just wanted an excuse to have people over. He lived alone. He told us he had a girlfriend in Germany, and that he was previously married in California. He had 3 kids, one was an adult at this point, and the 2 others must have been between 4 and 8. I had met his children before when they came to visit him at work. The oldest took care of the 2 younger. She was deaf, which I thought was interesting because I'd never met a deaf person before. She seemed like she didn't really like John, and only came to see him when she was dropping off the 2 younger ones to visit him for the weekend. He didn't have custody of either of them, and usually only saw them every few months. Sure, I say, but I'm not a very good cook, trying to give a forced smile. I had never been alone with him before, and it was getting more uncomfortable by the second. That's when he offered the tour. He grabbed me by the hand and ushered me outside. He had a good-sized backyard. It had a privacy fence. Not 1, but 2 small sheds and a garden. So that's where you dismember people and put them in your garden, don't you? I joked. Looking back at him, he just smiled. John had caught on to the serial killer jokes at work rather quickly, but he thought it was funny. He would often joke about hiding dead bodies, and I would usually play along. I don't know why I did. I think I just really felt like it was part of an inside joke. You got me. Why do you think the veggies grow so well? He said in a joking voice while walking towards the garden. Ex-wives make excellent fertilizer. After a while, he went back to the kitchen and told me to put on the apron, so I did. You know, you look so sexy in that. Let me take a picture and send to the other girls. You know they love you, right? He pulled out his phone and asked me to smile. At this point, I realized I'd been here for at least an hour and no one else was here yet. I quickly sent a text to Michael asking him when he would be here, and he replied with, John told us to be there at 6. You're already there? I gulped. Why had he asked me to come 2 hours before everyone else? "Hey, come sit at this chair with me." John called me over from the living room, so I did. He patted the back of the recliner and also let me know that it was my spot. I sat down, and he sat down on the couch across from me. I guess now would be a good time to mention that John owned several guns, and he usually had one strapped to his hip. No big deal, this is Texas, it's pretty normal for people to own guns, but he had unstrapped his gun and was toying with it. "Do you want a drink?" while gesturing to the beer in his hand. "No thank you, I really don't like beer." I was contemplating texting Michael to hurry up. "I've got a 16-year-old girl and a gun." He chuckled as he typed away on his phone, and I thought he was joking until Michael messaged me asking if everything was okay and saying to sit tight and that he'd be there soon. 20 minutes later, everyone had shown up. Michael made it a point to mouth, "Are you okay?" to me, and I nodded. John was just joking around, right? And the night went on, still weird but not quite as bad as before. Justin and John made quick work of cooking, and the rest of us sat at the table, including Michael's kids. He had 2 boys and 1 girl, and his girlfriend called Megan. Soon John had fixed up some cocktails for all of us, even me. I hardly touched it, but when Megan finished hers, she got up to get a refill. That's when it got weird. "Sit down," John demanded, standing up from his spot at the table, and just looked at him all confused. "I'm just getting a refill." "I'll get it for you, you're the guest, sit down." A bit more calmed than before, he grabbed her cup, went into the kitchen to fill it, and we all just kind of looked at each other. We made quick work of eating, even though the burger was almost raw in the middle, and at some point John had started talking about his kids and missing them. That's when he told Michael's daughter to come sit on his lap. She was a sweet little thing, so she did. "I love you," John told her, tearing up. "Say it back." So she did, and he started bawling. He was rambling about being just so happy that he had friends. He wished we could all just stay there forever. We were all quiet except for Justin, who was totally oblivious to anything going on, as he kept munching away at his burger. As everyone was getting ready to leave, my mum pulled up to come and get me. John quickly pulled us both into one of his sheds, sitting us both down. My mum looked at me confused. "Thank you so much for letting your daughter be my friend. It means the world to me. I know it's kind of weird since I'm old and she's still a kid, but it makes me happy." He kept repeating this in different variations for 10 minutes, until my mum said, "Okay, we're leaving now," and we both started heading for the car. Michael and Megan were still there looking relieved to see us. I later found out John had ordered them to wait until he came back to leave. They wanted to leave as soon as he stepped into the shed, but didn't want to leave us, and Justin had already departed. Once they saw us emerge, they got into their cars and started strapping their kids to the seat. John followed me and my mother to our car, and stood in the way of the driver's side door as soon as my mum buckled up. "Please don't leave," he said, still blocking us from closing the door. Eventually he made up an excuse about how it was getting dark and we had to go. Later I heard from Michael that John came back from our car and told him and Megan that my mum was crazy and wouldn't let him leave from our car, that she must have been on drugs. A few months later, me and another co-worker had planned on seeing a movie after work. He was also named Michael, but because that was confusing, we called him Logan. He had about an hour more of his shift left, and I decided to wait at one of the empty tables and eat some lunch. As I sat there, John came into the restaurant, presumably to get his check, because we all had to pick up our checks from the manager. He noticed me sitting alone and took the opportunity to sit next to me. "Hey, what you doing?" he exclaimed with a big smile on his face. "I'm waiting for Logan. We're going to see a movie together after he finishes his tables." "Why don't you wait at my house? I'm sure you don't want to wait here any longer." He leaned in, never taking his eyes off me. "He's going to be done soon. I might as well just wait here," I replied, trying to convince him to leave me alone. He didn't leave me alone. He begged me to come with him, and since I have a hard time saying no to people, I agreed. I let Logan know what was going on, and he seemed concerned but said, "Okay, I'll be there soon." Michael and I had already told Logan about our weird experience with him, so he knew that John was weird. Once we get to John's house, he made me a glass of orange juice and vodka. "Not supposed to drink, you know. I'm only 16, I reminded him. But he persisted. "Here, hold this." And that's when he handed me his gun. "Don't worry, it's loaded." I'd never held a gun before, and I definitely did not want to hold it. It was very uncomfortable and weird. He sat me down, and he told me, while pulling out a bench, "God, you look so sexy with that thing." I sat down at the table, trying to ignore his comment. I put the gun down and began working on the half-finished puzzle that was on the table. John put my screwdriver down next to the gun. I was right next to a window, and as I looked outside, I realized it was raining. Logan had messaged me that he was on his way, and I was just glad that I would get to leave soon. John was sat on the couch with several guns and a lot of ammunition sitting on the coffee table in front of him. From what I could tell, he was cleaning the guns, but the way the room was set up, he had his back facing me. Logan showed up, and we had 20 minutes until the movie started. "Well, we better get going," Logan said, motioning for me to follow him. Just as I got up, John pointed to the kitchen. "Why don't you stay for a drink? You have time before the movie starts, right?" Before either of us could protest, he patted the spot next to him, getting up and returning from the kitchen with a mixed drink for Logan. Just one, I guess, okay." Which turned into two, which turned into three. Not by Logan's choice, but because John was so insistent. "Okay, the movie just started. If we go fast, we may make it before the commercials end." Logan got up, grabbed his keys. "You really think you should drive now? Logan, you've been drinking." John chuckled, taking the keys out of his hand. "Stay here for a while. It would be awful if you got into an accident. Please," he begged. Logan and I exchanged concerned looks before sitting back down. "Okay, we'll stay until the next showing, I guess." Both of them forced a smile. "Do you guys want to see something?" John asked. We nodded hesitantly. He brought out a small safe and struggled to open it for about 10 minutes and even made us try because he liked watching us struggle. "I'm going to make you two rich." When he finally got it open, it was full of $2 bills and $1 coins. Cool stuff, but nothing of real value. He handed us both 2 Sacagawea coins each, claiming they would put us through college. Neither of us were buying it, but we went along with it, thanking him. My father collected coins, so I knew a small amount about them, and I assumed that John was confused. When he pulled out a Nebraska Centennial gun, it was gold-plated and had mother-of-pearl handle. He pointed it to the wall and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. "Whoops, glad that wasn't loaded," John chuckled, before putting it down and using his hand to spread the coins and various forms of currency around the world on the table. He did it for a while, scooping up coins and letting them fall between his fingers. "You guys should go get some drugs. I don't care anything," John told us, his eyes wide open. Logan and I saw this as an opportunity and took it. "Sure, we'll go do that. We'll be back," Logan replied, grabbing his keys, and once we got into his car, we both breathed a sigh of relief and decided to go to Michael's house to tell him about all the weird stuff that happened. When we got there after telling him everything, Michael got a text, and it was from John. "Don't trust them. They're liars and bad people. They're evil. They're using me." Me and Logan looked at each other. "Is he talking about us?" I asked, getting concerned. Michael looked at his phone. They had 15 other texts from him on screen. "Crap," Logan said, his eyes getting wide. "I forgot my phone at his house." Michael and I looked at each other and said, "Do you want us to go with you?" "What do we do?" "Go and say that my mum walked me home, and you ended up dropping me off at my house, but you forgot your phone. Say we couldn't find any drugs for him. We looked for a while. That's why it took so long. We couldn't call him back because you left your phone, and mine is out of service." I instructed this, trying to come up with better excuse. Logan left, and about 40 minutes later he came back. "He's literally crazy. I got there, gave him the excuse, and got my phone. He was sitting in the chair looking at me and then got up, hugged me, and wouldn't let me go for 10 minutes. Kept saying that he loves me and that I'm his best friend. Logan told us, and we all decided there's definitely something wrong with John. We never went back to his house, and John began acting weird at work. Erratic, jumping from happy to sad randomly. He quit a few months later, and the last we heard was that he moved to Tennessee. I looked up his mugshot on a website and found an arrest record from 2013. The charge was listed as assault. The most prominent conversation I remember having with him was when he said he wished me and him could run off together, rob banks, kill people, and have lots of sex. In his words, I would be the Bonnie to his Clyde. That I'm the woman of his dreams. And I'm 16. I really hope not to see John again. I've had enough of him for a lifetime.
Right around high school graduation, I was sitting in the living room at 1 or 2 a.m. when I saw headlights and heard a thud. I cracked the front door and there was a car outside. It appeared as though they may have hit my truck. As I began to open the door, they sped off. I checked the truck the following morning, but nothing looked obvious. I went to work at my cashier job, and my co-workers were talking about armed robbery and a taxi driver that was executed with a handgun overnight. Pretty scary, I thought. About a month later, one of my mum's friends who happened to work for the county asked me to look at my truck very closely and call her if I found anything. I told her later that after close inspection, yes, there was a small crack to the plastic trim around the driver's side tail light, and I told her about the car that probably did it. She explained to me that detectives had arrested a group of teenagers while investigating the cabbie murder, and that during the interviews they mentioned stealing a car and bumping into a truck while joyriding before robbing a gas station at gunpoint and executing a taxi driver. About 2 weeks ago, my wife and I had friends over, and someone mentioned a Facebook story about a cabbie getting robbed at gunpoint. Someone else mentioned the execution, so I shared my story. My wife then added that we both could have died that night because she was at the gas station when the clerk got robbed. I knew that something bad happened to her around that time and that she never talked about it much. So it's a scary and odd coincidence to me and her, even though we both weren't together physically at that time, we were both in the path of the same violent crime spree, and any other course of action during that time could have resulted in the death in either or both of us. Last December, I went to a kayaking trip that was a 5-hour drive away from my place. I was invited by my friend to accompany his wife, so I left quite late, but I predicted I would get there around 8 p.m. The campsite itself wasn't that secluded. It was by the river, behind a little town, but to get there, I had to use a 2-lane expressway that goes through a forest reserve. It was around 7 p.m. when I reached the expressway, but what I did not expect was how winding and dark the road was. A few solar road lights and some signs of beware the animals passing here and there. I was driving alone and it was drizzling, but I wasn't too worried because the expressway was filled with cars going in the same direction as me. Because of that, the traffic was slower than the average speed. I have to admit I'm not a patient driver by any chances, so any chances I have to pass the cars in front of me until I get to this van at the end of the line. But I decide maybe I should just stay behind the van to be safe since the road was getting dark. Then we reached the passing line. The cars behind me started to pass us. The van maintained in slow speed. I counted and there were already 6 cars past us, so I ramped up and left the van. There was a right bend, and once I got through it, I was alone on the road. I waited for the cars behind me to come out from right behind the bend, but there was no one. I thought I was driving too fast, so I slowed down. Not even the van showed up. The passing lane ended, and now I was driving through a ravine. I saw a temporary signboard saying drive slow, and a few meters ahead another signboard saying landslide 100 meters ahead. What the hell? Is this road closed?
but I didn't see any alternate route on the way, and there was no junction, so I drove as slow as it could be, and there was no landslide whatsoever, and still no sign of any vehicle on the road except mine. It was the most agonizing 10 minutes of my life, driving alone on a narrow, winding road in the middle of nowhere, just hills and trees all around me. No light, but my car lamp in front of me, and my phone screen. It was eerily silent. I put the volume of my car radio up, but I just didn't feel right. And it was so cold, with the air conditioning turned off too. I saw a welcome signboard at a left junction, turned left, and have never felt so relieved seeing random shop lots with people in them.
We went to a school located on a main street in Sydney. One day there was a bank robbery further down the street. Masked men, armed police, the whole 9 yards. During this time, a few students decided they were going to sneak off and have a quick ciggy down the back oval. This oval linked the main road to the back streets. Meanwhile, back in the main street, the police were chasing the robbers down it, who promptly ran through the school. By this time, we were already in lockdown. The smokers and robbers ran through the oval and into the back street. The police had lost them at the time and stood on the back over trying to work out where they could have gone. One of the officers heard sounds coming from the bushes, and all 20 armed police officers raised their guns and called for them to come out. 2 terrified 15-year-olds came out of the bushes to see 20 armed police officers aiming their guns at them. The robbers were eventually caught, I believe, and the 2 kids never smoked again.
I was at a little party last summer, and we realized one of my friends was missing. There were only about 20 of us, so it didn't take a long time for us to realize this. Now keep in mind, the host's house is very big and ancient, near a wood that is known for being the place where people went to drink. We call her phone a few times, and she doesn't pick up. We called her boyfriend at the time, who said she had never contacted him. It had been about 30 minutes since we noticed and went searching the house twice, but is nowhere to be found. It's raining extremely heavy, so we don't think she would have been there, but she was very drunk. Me and my other 2 buddies ran around the neighborhood for half hour. We couldn't find her. On the road next to the house, I just see a random 40-year-old guy with a beer in his hand walking in the rain drinking. He looks at me and screams at me to watch out for the rain, but I was lucky to still be this young, which I thought was funny. Oh, and he also clearly had a gun in his pocket. I was relieved to see he didn't go towards my friend's house. Keep in mind I'm in Canada, so I found this very odd. I go with another girl in the woods and talk to her about earlier, because maybe she thought people were there, even though there was clearly no one there because of the rain. The girl I was with was really panicked too. We walk around the woods calling her name, and then I noticed something. There were 2 very tall people in the middle of the park on top of the stairs in what looked like long robes. They were both looking at something on the stairs. My brain automatically thinks it's the girl we're looking for, but these guys looked really creepy, so I didn't just want to go to them and tell them it's our friend. My brain automatically thinks it's the girl that we're looking for, but these guys looked really creepy, so I didn't want to just go and tell them it's our friend. We'll just pick her up, thanks, bye. I didn't mention this to my friend. I was surprised the 2 hadn't heard us before, and after a minute they start walking away. I guide the other girl to where they were, without either one of them seeing me. We arrive at the spot. They were not looking at my friend on the floor or anything. There were just 3 squirrels apparently dead on the stairs. They did not look like they were shot, hit, or bitten. I remember that we still have to look for our friend, and my other friend is pretty disgusted, so we leave. We call our other friend to see if they find her, but they didn't. It's the most anticlimactic ending ever, but we go back to the house completely drenched in water. My friend goes to get her boyfriend's coat, and she finds the girl we're looking for sleeping in the corner under 3 other coats. Glad she was safe, but I was close to having the scare of my life in the woods earlier, thanks to these creepy buggers, and whatever the hell they did to those poor squirrels. I was on a bike ride with my friend, through an apartment complex. We had gone there about 5 times and knew it quite well. There were 2 things weird about it. First, there was this man who had his phone to his face like he was on speaker but never said anything. He always watched us as we cycled past. When he noticed a spot we usually rode, he stood in our way, like literally would walk to where we rode and stand. This may have been because we rode street on BMX, but I don't think so. Then one day we got split up, one of my friends with me and the others on his own. We rode around looking for my other friend but couldn't find him. Eventually we found him. He was biking towards us fast. We slowed down and asked where he was, and he said that a guy had been found following him in a truck. He was quite shook up, and someone called the police. They arrived and could not find the truck, and nobody thought of mentioning the man. We never saw the man with the phone or truck again, and we never returned to the complex. This happened to a friend of mine and her brother, who I also know. The car had 2 other people in the back seat, so it wasn't some sort of illusion or mind trick. They were driving down to Tennessee from Kansas. It was a very dark and lonely road, as told by my friend called Kate. They were doing between 60 and 65. 2 hours pass and there are no signs of life. It was 2 a.m. Then suddenly they see a black dog running towards them with blood eyes, and they slam on the gas and go faster as they near the dog, when it just vanishes. 5 miles down the road they saw the dog again with red eyes, and they slam on the brakes and turn the other way. Till this day they don't know what it was. The scary part was everyone saw it too. Kate, her brother, Jim, and the 2 friends in the back seat. They all saw the dog. They've speculated it could have been a bloodhound, but they don't know. When I was around 10 or 11, I was home alone. The doorbell rang as I was watching TV, so I hastily moved my bowl of cereal and got up to answer the door. It was the mailman who said he had gotten a package, but it was so big that he needed help carrying it. Something felt off about him, as he wasn't wearing a uniform but a dirty white shirt and jeans. I asked him where his truck was because I didn't see it parked out front, and he said it was around the corner, and to just follow him and grab the parcel. He kept telling me to go with him, but I politely said I wasn't feeling well and that we would just get our mail from the post office. He said how much of a hassle that would be, and just go out there and get it with him now. I said I had to get my shoes on from upstairs, and he waited outside. I locked the door, bolted upstairs and closed all the windows, and called my mum to come home and explained everything. The man was still outside as he shouted at me, asking if I'd gotten my shoes. I replied that my mum was coming over because she was stronger and could help carry the package. Once I said that, he was quick to run and I never saw him again. They never caught him, and I hope that he never lured any kids and tricked them into going into his van. So to the creepy mailman, let's never meet again. In the summer of 2002, when I was 12, I went to the California School for the Blind for a tech training camp. There were 12 of us, 6 girls and 6 boys. The boys had started spreading scary ghost stories around school. What they didn't know was that some of the stories were actually true. On the first night I was telling my roommate the story of the booms. Booms are toilet bowl-shaped bouncing creatures that bring knickknacks to children. The moment I described the sound they made, 3 loud booms came from the wall of the room beside ours, and I asked the girls in that room if they'd heard it, and they said no. The second night, I got up to go to the room attached to the shared bathroom. That's where I saw it. It was round like a ball, with a half horn on its head and glowing red eyes. I don't remember the next part, but I was filled in later. I apparently ran out the room screaming that there was something in our bathroom. Oddly, I remember leaving the room prior to seeing the thing to tell someone that there was peeling paint on a wall. My roommate told me she'd heard speaking in male voices, and also many rude words. She also said that she heard chains rattling outside and saw the glow of eyes.
4 years later, I started attending the school there. The staff members from that night still worked there, and her response when we met is that she remembered me that night. She then told me that she saw it, and she and other students and staff had heard similar stuff. Other friends told me that they had seen and heard things. Some of the events were freezing cups of water, glowing toys, drums, flutes, and orbs. I believe that in the children's dorm and health center are the two most haunted areas, and it's said that the school was built on an Indian burial ground.
When I was 17, I was at a friend's party. We grew up in a small town, lots of wood, no street lights, houses far apart from one another. There was virtually no crime in this town, except for the abduction of a 5th grader about a decade earlier. Her remains were found behind a restaurant in town years later, but the case sadly was never solved. My friends and I had been drinking all night, so I didn't want to drive home. That happened to me frequently enough, and I always had a sleeping bag in the trunk of my car. Around 2 a.m., I ran out to get the sleeping bag. It was pouring out with thunder and lightning, and I could barely see my car, which was parked just beyond the driveway on the other side of the road. When I got to it, I popped the trunk and dug around for my sleeping bag. There was a flash of lightning and the street lit up for a second. That's when I noticed a middle-aged man standing a few feet from me. He didn't move, he just stood completely still. I can't remember what I said, for all I know I probably gasped. However, I remember exactly what he said. "I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you?" Not even a hello or a "sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." I slammed my trunk shut, sleeping bag still in there, and sprinted back to the house. I immediately told everyone what happened, and of course they were drunk and thought I was making it up, but I forced them to look out the window towards the driveway. After 30 seconds, lightning struck and the street lit up again. Sure enough, there was the man walking down the street in the opposite direction of the house. I don't know about you, but it was intensely creepy. I was at the post office, and I noticed an older man standing in the corner, watching the line. I didn't think much of it, but I did notice he didn't have a package or mail in his hand, which was strange. I thought perhaps he was waiting for something or someone. After I finished my transaction at USPS, I started walking towards my car. Unfortunately, there were a lot of cars, and I had to park further at the end of the parking lot. A few seconds after I'd left the USPS store, the man exited too. I felt a bit strange, but kept walking towards my car, taking my keys out as I did so. I started getting this weird feeling that he was following me, so I quickened my pace. He began walking faster too. When I got close enough to my car, he began screaming, "Wait, I have something to say to you." I'd never seen the man in my life, and he was scaring the crap out of me. Not saying anything in the post office and then chasing me to my car. I unlocked and ran in, slammed the door, and he tried opening the handle. He began banging on the window, trying to open the door, but my hand was so shaky that I stalled the car. The car was stuck, and I wasn't sure if there were people around, so finally I lowered the window an inch and asked him if I could help him with something. "I noticed you at the post office and thought you were very beautiful. Can I get your number?" I don't know how many times this has gotten him play, but it didn't work for me. "I have a boyfriend," I told him, retried my keys and zipped the hell out of there. Now whenever I'm in a parking lot, I always look left and right and behind me to make sure no one's following. I'm not sure what the guy would have done if he'd have opened the door handle, but honestly I don't want to think about it. I'm a truck driver. I was crossing Texas in the middle of the night. After a while I become white line mesmerized when I notice a few red lights slowly flashing ahead. Huh? Construction zone, I guess. Except, as I'm coming out of my self-imposed hypnosis, I slowly become aware that more and more red lights are there, on both sides of the highway, and they're all blinking at the same time. Fully awake now, I find myself trying to find the ends of the light, to the left or the right. I feel like Hammy in Over the Hedge. It never ends. It never ends that way too. I'm really beginning to freak out, but... Oh, wait. It was just a wind farm, and I'm an idiot.
I am a teacher, and have been teaching English in Texas since 2012. This is my 7th year in the classroom, and I've recently moved up to a new high school in our district. I was and am very excited to begin my new year here, after being in the trenches of middle school classrooms for 6 years. My 2nd year in my first school, I was asked to move classrooms to a room at the end of the hall upstairs, which wasn't a problem per se, as many people moved due to attribution, and schools are always willing to help teachers move classrooms. The school at that time was roughly 20 years old. I took great pleasure in preparing a welcoming environment for students. The walls were covered, which I'm positive was a fire hazard, in amazing posters, engaging student art. I had several lamps as well as fluorescent lights. Every year for Halloween we'd begin to read and analyze Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which was always a favorite. I took 2 days to read and analyze and read about the poems the students were really receptive to, and enjoyed the spooky atmosphere I created with decoration as we listened to Christopher Lee's and James Earl Jones' version on YouTube. It was a nice way to relax before the holiday. The first year in the new classroom right after Halloween and the Poe analysis, things began happening. The lamps would flicker. There wasn't any perceivable pattern, nothing flew around the room, exploded or fell over. The lamps would just flicker, whether I was in the room by myself or in a conference or anything. Once a week, the lights would flicker on and off. I attributed this to the old wiring, and honestly thought nothing of it, choosing to capitalize on the events and teach students about puns at the same time, commenting that we had a poltergeist among us who loved poetry and generally freaking us out. It wasn't disrespectful or ironic, it was more of a nod to whatever was happening and generally added to the climate of the room and the culture of the different classes. After winter break, something else happened. I was working with a small group in the back of the class during a test. I was playing music softly in the background. The music went all the way up, as in the volume was maxed, went back to medium level and then went back to max, then slowly went back down to the original volume. Again, I attributed this to our poltergeist. Students thought it was great, and logically, I thought this was due to some issue with a software bug, old wiring or something of that nature. Things like this, lights, volume modulating, happened once a week or so after the initial volume incident, and continued until my last year at the school, when I packed up my classroom and moved to a new school at the end of last year. I finally said goodbye to my little visitor part for nostalgia's sake, and nothing weird happened. I just took my last load of stuff down to my car, pretty anticlimactic. Nothing else happened until a few weeks ago at my new school. At this point it had been about 9 months since anything had happened, and one of my classes had earned a game for the day for an upcoming Friday. One of the students jokingly said that they were going to bring in a Ouija board, to which I said it was not a good idea, and I told him that I'm totally haunted. Of course they wanted to hear this story, and being that it was the end of the 6 weeks everyone was passing, and they liked stories, I told them the story and relayed the above. The only thing was this: I told them the story about the volume, and I was leaning over my chair, elbows to my knees, reminiscing as I mentioned the poltergeist. About 10 students were paying attention with eye contact at this point, and I was playing music on my computer when suddenly the volume spiked. It was completely maxed. It then moved to about medium level, maxed again, and went back to a quiet background ambience. And that's where the girls and a boy screamed. It freaked them out. They lost it. One Catholic student hung his crucifix on the volume knob and said he'd pray for me. One girl ran out the room and refused to come back inside for the rest of the class period. I was able to calm them down, and nothing else happened at school. I asked our tech guru on campus what might have caused the volume to modulate. Wires crossed, rats, hardware or software issues. I don't know this man well. We haven't had conversations, and he replies saying that it isn't possible. There's no logical reason, and then he said that you must be haunted. This was in front of a class where I have a few students from the original class that saw the volume thing happen earlier. It freaked them out, and I laughed it off, but it was the first time I really considered the words in relation to poltergeist. I looked around my classroom, and the one thing I bought decoration-wise from my middle school classroom was a painting/drawing of Edgar Allan Poe that I've hung on my bulletin board in the back. This last Monday was my first time when something happened at home. Two things, actually. I went to my younger son's room to wake him up, flipped on his desk lamp, and the bulb burnt out with a loud pop. I don't think much of it until I was drying my hair in the downstairs bathroom. My younger son was downstairs reading his book on the couch, way out of range from the bathroom. I had a hairdryer blasting near my head, so it was pretty loud, and my husband, dog, and older son were upstairs when I hear a loud scratching at head height on the bathroom door. It was seriously loud, as if my dog, a German Shepherd, was scratching up that high. So I immediately turned off the hairdryer, opened the door saying, "What is it?" And my youngest son ran around the corner saying, "What was that, Mum?" completely clueless. I didn't have the courage to tell my husband until after school break. He's quite logical generally, and honestly I was embarrassed he'd think I was crazy. He tried to explain that I must be tired and stressed. All logical, good-natured suggestions. He's telling me this as he was walking towards the bathroom to prove a point. That's when he found the scratches on the bathroom door around head height. Not gouged into the wood, but scratches in the varnish you can clearly see at an angle. I asked him what to do, and he said to share it with you, and get suggestions as to what you guys think.
Last April, my boyfriend's friend was throwing a party. The party hall they were using was in a not-so-nice part of town. There was mega drug deals and gang activity close by. The event was formal, so I wore a dress. It may have been too tight or flashy. Of course, my boyfriend wanted to go walk to the QT down the street because he got bored of the party. On the walk back, I noticed a very sketchy-looking male staring me down. I figured I'd just ignore it because we were almost back anyway. The party hall was actually two that shared the same bathroom area. It was just a little hallway that connected them, and on both sides had doors, so you only saw who went into the bathroom. Once we got back, we were in the line for food, which was right next to the bathroom hall door thing. The door creaks open, and I look over and it's the guy who was staring me down earlier. He whispers something inaudible. Not thinking, I leaned a bit closer to try and understand him. He then reaches his hand out and whispers, "Come, look at this with me," and attempts to grab me. I immediately jump back and try to get my boyfriend's attention, and when my boyfriend looked over, the doors closed abruptly. I don't know who the guy was, but I know that if I let him grab me, I'm sure nothing would have gone well. In college, there was a big rock at the top of a hill that everyone used to climb. It had lights pointing to it, so it would be lit up at night. Some friends and I decided to climb to the top at night. It was a nice evening, but there was a chance of rain, so we get to the top and I see lightning in the distance. I count the time between the lightning and the thunder, 15 seconds. I tell my friends, "Hey, that storm's coming our way, and I guess we have around 15 to 20 minutes before it gets here." It took some convincing for them to agree, and even though I was being a negative Nancy, we would head back down. Getting down took 15 minutes. Just before we got to the cars, lightning hit the rock and blew out all the lights. Everyone made it off the rock. When the lightning struck, one of my friends said, "Please don't say I told you so." This happened in the summer of 2017, Tallinn, Estonia. My sister and I, both Americans in our early 20s, were on a trip at the time to Estonia and Latvia. I definitely want to preface this by saying that Estonia was one of the most interesting, amazing places I have ever been to, and I'd highly recommend traveling there over any tourist traps in Western Europe. But anyway, we had been exploring the city, which is beautiful, for the past few days, and it was our last night in Tallinn before we caught the bus to Latvia the next day. I had wanted to check out the LGBT bars in each city. I'm a gay girl, my sister is not, and decided on our last night we'd go there. Unfortunately, that happened to be a Thursday, so we got all dressed up to go, pre-gamed a bit, and headed out to the bar. When we got there, it was completely empty except for the bartender, an unfriendly old Russian woman. So my sister and I decided to just hang out there for a while and order a drink each. Figured that since we were there, we may as well just chill. The drinks were cheaper by US standards, at 4 to 5 euros a piece, and I got an amaretto on the rocks. So at some point, this older guy in his late 50s or early 60s came and sat at the bar. I had been in a comfy chair in another room, sipping on my amaretto, as my sister and I decided to explore the area, and I just happened to be in a different one at the time. But meandered back to the bar to chat with my sister, as she was in an armchair in the corner, and I chose the bar stool closest to her. Unfortunately, that also happened to be the seat next to, or a few seats from, this guy who came in. At some point, and I can't remember how exactly, he began talking to me, with a heavy Russian accent, and spoke very, very little English. I figured he was an older gay man just trying to make conversation with a foreigner. Harmless, right? So I started chatting with him, me being somewhat buzzed and generally more gregarious and less guarded than usual. Unfortunately, being tipsy, I had forgotten that at least in the Baltics, gay bars are billed as being for LGBT people and open-minded, aka LGBT-friendly, hetero people. Also, that guy could have been bisexual. So this guy told me his name was Igor, and we had a very slow, stilted conversation due to him not knowing English and me not knowing Russian. Apparently he was visiting from the city of Rostov, which is in the southwest part of Russia. The hometown of Andrei Chikatilo, not a good sign. Anyway, we had been trying to talk for a while, and then he said, "Young American woman." I thought it was kind of weird, but chalked it up to him using some of the few English words he knew. In any case, it was getting a little late, and I was looking for a way to politely escape. I told my sister I was going to go to the bathroom really quick before we left. So I went downstairs, and there was only one multi-stall bathroom. At least I could see. I forget whether it was marked women's or just gender neutral. So I went in, and when I came out of the stall, there he was, right in the area outside the stalls, wandering over to the sinks. I had no idea he'd followed me down, so I was pretty weirded out at this point, but not enough to run. I washed my hands, and he was between me and the door, and kept trying to chat. And then he began repeating, "Young American woman," over and over a few times. Fortunately, at that moment, my sister appeared outside the door and called me to go, and that proved the perfect opportunity to escape. She had seen him follow me downstairs and thought to check up on me to make sure I was okay. Had she not been there, I don't even know what would have happened. Probably nothing good at all. So we hightailed it out of there, but for a last very creepy twist, as we were walking away from the bar, and we were a decent distance away, we looked back and saw Igor leave too. We practically ran for our Airbnb, and he was never to be seen again. We left for Latvia the next day, and had a great rest of our trip. Personally, I think there was a very good chance he wanted to kidnap us or worse, and I'm glad I didn't have the misfortune of having to find out. One night when I was 13, I was doing a weekend visit with my dad. You know, the kid of divorced parents. In the middle of the night, we got a phone call. I knew that a call in the middle of the night was never good. My dad answered it, and I heard him whispering, and I knew it wasn't good news. It was at this point I noticed that there were red and blue cop lights whirling around from the window. The next thing I know, my dad comes into my room, which I shared with my sisters. The weird thing was he was squatting down low. He saw I was awake. Since I was the eldest, my dad told me what was going on. He whispered, "I need you to help me wake up your sisters and keep them calm." It was the police. There's a man on the street with a gun, and we are being evacuated. At this point, my heart was racing. I remember it was pounding in my ears, it was beating so hard. The cops had told us to leave all of our lights off, stay away from the windows and lay low. So I helped my dad wake my two younger sisters. We played it all as a game, as we stayed near the floor and put on our winter boots and coats as it was freezing out. The next part was the hardest. We kept it vague what was going on with my sisters because we had to go back down 2 flights of stairs very quietly. When we got outside, I was terrified of being in the open. My mind started imagining how bad it would be if we got hurt, or if I died. What if I had to watch my sister or dad get shot? And yet I couldn't let any of that show, so my sisters wouldn't be as scared as I was. We meet the cops at the bottom of the stairs. They told us to leave the area on foot. My dad asked, "Where?" They shrugged, so we went to a 24-hour burger place a few blocks away. After we evacuated the area, I felt so relieved. We sat in the burger joint drinking cocoa and sleeping on the benches for a few hours with some other evacuees. But nonetheless, having that existential crisis at age 13 really scarred me for the longest time. I don't remember if the guy ended up being caught, but eventually we were allowed to go back home. But still, the fear you feel when someone might be targeting you with a gun and may very well want you dead by the end of the night definitely leaves an impact.
When I was driving this one time, I saw what I thought was the goat man of Nerdy Mountain. I was driving home from work late one night at 11 p.m. The car overheats, so I have to pull into a lay-by in the middle of an empty mountain road to let it cool down for a bit. Slowly, I drive in when I see a white, translucent humanoid figure run in front of my headlights and disappear into the forest. I sat in my car for a half hour, crapping myself while I waited for it to cool down. It was the most bizarre experience of my life.
I come from a pretty middle-class family, all wholesome, etc. I have bipolar disorder, and in my teens I smoked weed, drank, took a lot of shrooms, hung out with the guys that stole cars and shoplifted. I used to hitchhike a lot, as we lived pretty rural. My first real girlfriend was a pretty hectic chick from Ukraine who grew up in Russia. Long story short, she suddenly ghosted me, but eventually I found out she was seeing someone else. And obviously I saw red and had to find out. So I hitched into her town at around midnight. The guy who picked me up was in his 40s or so and asked why I was on the highway hitching. He was worried because he had a daughter around the same age, and he asked advice on how to deal with her better, and he listened. I felt a huge respect for him. He asked why I was hitching at midnight and I told him. All he told me was to be careful. It could be a big moment in your life. The ride I got home was the big one though. So I get to her house and long story short, cops were called. I sprinted through backyards and through drains and alleys to get to my hitching spot at the start of the highway. As I'm running down the road, I see a car. A miracle. It's 3 a.m. now and the car actually stopped. I open the door and it's the nicest smelling car. The driver is a lovely 70-year-old lady and she says, "Are you going to rob me?" I laughed and said, "Only if you don't rob me," and I hopped in. We rode in mostly silence, but towards the end she said, "You remind me of someone I lost long ago. I know things will get better for you soon." And eventually I got home. I had a little granny flat away from the house, so I snuck and jumped into bed. Literally 20 seconds later, I hear my dad walk from the house to my room on the phone saying, "I think you've got the wrong person." He barges in and is like, "Hey, Danny, are you here?" "Yeah, why?" "The police are on the phone looking for you," and hands me the phone. "Hello, your ex-girlfriend says you smashed her window." "I've been here all night." "Where's that?" And I say a small town around 20 minutes away. "Okay, good night." If the car hadn't pulled up, and let's face it, why the hell was an old lady driving around at 3 a.m., I'd be put away, and my life messed up. I cleaned up my act, and after high school I'm doing very well, but my life would have been very different if it wasn't for that old lady, giving me the ride that literally saved my life.
When I was in grade 9, it was just a normal boring day at Brooks High School. We were doing work when we got an announcement saying code black, which means lockdown. My teachers quickly locked the doors, shut the curtains on the windows, and I heard some of the other teachers rush out and lock the 2 doors in our foyer. And I said to myself, awesome, no work. I was always like that whenever the fire alarm went off, but I knew it could be serious, and I had to be sensible and listen to my teachers in case something bad happened. Everyone sat at their desks while I sat on a bench seat, which was close to the door, and even though the window on the classroom door was covered, I tried to look out the side to see if I could see anyone on the school grounds through the foyer window, but nothing. The whole school was that quiet. It was the quietest I've ever heard our grade block. It started to become scary and freaky. After a while, we finally got the all-clear announcement and went about our day. At lunch, rumours were going around saying that some idiot in our grade who I hated held the assistant principal up at knife point, and he had a list of people he wanted to kill, including one of my friends, and he was the one who told me the rumour. I think he was expelled, and ever since then, we never had another lockdown, not even after we graduated, and from this day I know my old high school is safe and secure for anyone to attend.
This happened when I was 18. I was going to meet my friend at a local school to skateboard and just hang out. My friend said he might not show up because he had a headache, but told me to go ahead and he'll text me if he's coming or not after. That's the only reason I went. I live right across the border from the US in Canada, and we have smog right now because of the wildfires in California, so that made everything a bit more scary. I was taking a quick break on my phone when a kid with a backpack on walks up to me and says hello. I didn't know if he was talking to me, so I said, "Pardon?" He casually responds that he was just saying hello and walks past me. He says to have a good day and leaves around the corner of the school. I thought that was the end of it and just got an okay, probably just social kid vibe. Honestly, I wish I was wrong. Not even 10 minutes pass when this kid comes around the corner he first came from last time. I had set up my phone to film a trick, so I actually got the first minute and a half of our interaction on tape. Only my feet and board are visible, but you can clearly see him. Because the smog, everything was pretty fuzzy, and it looked like he came out of nowhere. So I got a bit scared when I noticed him. The next part is just our conversation. "Hey, I walked around the whole school. We're the only ones here." He said that while looking directly at me. "Yeah, makes sense. COVID and the smog, not too many people around, I guess." "Yeah, I want to check, not even kids with their parents." It put me on edge a bit. Everything he said seems really thought out, and was said in a very creepy tone, almost like he wanted me to know we were completely alone. At this point I picked up my phone, and the video was still recording. This made me feel safer in case something happened. He then sits down in front of me, takes off his backpack, puts it in front of him and unzips it. He takes out one of those metal sticks you have to put together by screwing each part together, and takes out a silver mask. If you've seen Money Heist, it looked a bit like the Salvador Dali mask, but all silver, and with just a moustache being black, and then lays them out in front of him, all while staring at me. "Do you know about gangs?" I'm not in one, so I don't know that much about them, but I know they exist. "Do you know about Poco gangs?" I live in a city named Poco, and we have a specific gang here. Like I said, man, I'm not into gangs, so I wouldn't know too much about them because I don't associate with them. Poco gangs wear masks like this, and they use sticks like this to attack people. I actually got him asking me about gangs on video, and replying. I'm standing with my phone in hand at the end of the video, and I text to call my boyfriend, saying that there's a kid here asking me about gangs and that I'm a bit scared. The call is going, and my boyfriend can hear our conversation but doesn't respond, knowing that he should just hurry over, as he lives a few minutes away. He pulls out from his back what I know is a golf divot, which is easiest to explain as a two-pronged sharp thing that fixes grass in golf. I didn't know what it was and just saw a metal and sharp object. I took a step back and moved towards my stuff, which was a few feet to my right. "Are you leaving? Are you scared?" "I'm just gonna grab my stuff, bro." He drags the divot along the ground and says, This is how you make it sharper. Yeah, they sharpen knives like that too. It's sharp. He then made an almost stabbing motion with it as he said that, and I move away a bit, being genuinely scared he's going to do something and put my board between us. Are you leaving? Are you scared? If anyone is around me and has something sharp while I'm talking to them about gangs, I'm going to keep away, mate. He threw the divot back in his bag and mockingly said, There, I'll put it away, it's just golfing, jeez. I'm just concerned about my own safety, dude. I put my stuff in my pockets and he once again asks if I'm leaving. Do you want me to go? Nah, I just want to talk and sit with you. At this point, my boyfriend walks around the corner that's behind me, and I see fear in the kid's eyes. My boyfriend is 6 foot, while I'm 5'3", and is wearing a hoodie with his hood up. He did look intimidating, and it made the kid back off. Do you know him? Yeah, he was supposed to be here like 20 minutes ago. My boyfriend walks up to me and pretends he was just late to hang out and puts his arm around me. Is that your older brother? Then he looks at the kid and says, Nah, I'm his boyfriend, and kisses my forehead. We start to leave and say bye to the kid, who looks at me and says, I'll see you later. Yeah, I don't know about that. I was creeped out and scared, and I'm saying random stuff just to leave. My boyfriend and me turn the corner and start walking when we realize he's following us. He had the mask on and is dragging the metal stick on the cement. It's making a really loud noise, as everything else was really quiet. There was in fact no one around. My boyfriend walks me to the playground, and finally people started showing up. A family with their kids, a lady walking their dog, and a guy smoking near the forest. My boyfriend and me went to the corner store, and I fill him in on what happened, and that he came perfectly in time. We buy some random stuff, and go back to his house where his friend is hanging out and waiting for him. We tell his mum, who informs us there has been a non-emergency call to the local police station of a kid hanging out in people's yards for no reason, and says we should call them too, to let them know in case it's the same kid, and because he had a dangerous weapon. We drive back to the school to see if he's there. He was, and was with the guy who was smoking. I called them non-emergency police line and got an automated message saying they're either closed or can't take any more calls. The next day when I called, they apologized and said that it should be 24/7 and not get the automated message. They asked if I had a picture, which I didn't, but I gave his voice and description. And the police said they didn't have much to go on but would keep a record. But in any case, I hope to not meet that creepy kid again. This happened before I was born. Our house was placed at the back of our land, so we had a big front yard and a tall metal fence. One night my dad was outside hanging the clothes and he came running inside and said to my mum that somebody was coming in from the front fence. She scolded him and said that our fence was locked and that there was no way anyone was breaking in and that it was just his imagination. Around this time, one of my dad's friends said she has been seeing something standing behind my mum lately, but my mum was a skeptic and thought his friend was trying to scare her. A few days later, around midnight, Mum was about to lock the door in our house when she started to feel like the floor was shaking. Her first thought was that it was an earthquake, but then she saw how our living room tiles started to tear apart and the floor started to crack up in the dark abyss. Dad and her quickly ran outside. As soon as they got there, they started throwing up. My dad didn't puke as much, but my mother puked till blood came out, so my dad kind of knew that something was happening, and quickly went inside again and grabbed some holy water that my grandma had brought from Costa Rica not a long time ago. He poured the water into my mum, and she immediately stopped puking. He also poured some into himself and scattered it around the house. When they saw how some white smoke came out of the house, then they saw some white smoke leave the house. The next morning my aunt came and saw the mess. She quickly contacted a shaman or curandero, and they bought lots of stuff for a cleansing ritual. One of my uncles also passed by and told my mum that the spirit was sent with the intention of killing her and that she's lucky to be alive. My dad never saw the floor cracking, the illusion was only seen by my mother. Fast forward a few months, and I was born. My half-sister had been telling my mum to never let said family member, "Alan, take me anywhere." One morning, Alan came by and asked if he could take me out for a few photos at a restaurant and he'd be back in a few hours. Mum refused, but Dad insisted on letting me go as he was close with Alan, and Mum told him what my sister said and he just brushed it off. So I was out all day till 5 p.m, and Mum was mad because he thought we'd be back sooner. That night at 1 a.m, I began crying non-stop. My dad immediately called Alan and asked him what's wrong with me, but he told my dad to just go put a glass of water beneath my bed. That worked only the first night. The next night I was crying again, so Dad called Alan and this time he said to put a knife under the bed, and again it only worked once. On the third night my mum and dad got mad and swung the knife around, but it also worked that night. They couldn't bear it anymore, so they called for a family friend who's a curandero. She came into our place and inspected my room and said there was something strong in there, so she needed to perform a ritual. So they went and brought all the stuff she needed. At the time, Alan used to hang out a lot with a santera, so we suspect she used him to get to us. There was also this one time my dad fought with a friend that practiced voodoo and santeria. Dad was away for a few days and left Mum and me alone at home. His friend passed by, gave us a big doll-shaped present and left. It was around dusk, and as soon as Mum unwrapped the present I started crying. May have been a coincidence. The doll was an old lady with lots of wrinkles and was quite tall and creepy. Luckily a cousin had just dropped by, so Mum asked him to dispose of the doll and he quickly agreed and left with it. Nothing paranormal happened, but it just became weird and gave somebody a creepy old-ass doll for no particular reason. Dad knew an awful lot of friends and family and wasn't on good terms with some of them, so that's why some of them tried to harm us. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal and I haven't experienced anything firsthand, but I believe in what my mother said, and I'm open to the possibility that everything that happened may have nothing to do with paranormal activity. But I'm interested if anyone has been through anything similar or knows of hexing or spirits and stuff like that.
In 2005, I hit Okinawa, Japan's shores at the ripe age of 19. I never had an experience or reason to believe in the paranormal at this point. For the next 2 years all was well, drinking, smoking and having fun. In 2006, I sustained an eye injury in Fallujah, Iraq, that put me out of commission. Every Marine is a rifleman, and as I could no longer shoot, they made me a barracks manager, as my unit was deployed yet again. I was pumped for this job, as I didn't want to be discharged before my 4 years were up. That, and everyone knew it was a skate job, aka easy as hell. I had the usual problems of broken furniture and such for a while. One day a Marine comes into my office and tells me, "There's a woman in a white dress with long black hair that covers half her face who sits in the upper corner of my room and watches me as I sleep." I think to myself, this man has seen The Ring too many times. I tell him I cannot move his room and to move on with it. At this point in time, I'm manager of Barrack 5696. There came a time when Barrack 5704, diagonal from us, was empty, and we needed renovations. I was in charge of moving everyone to 5704 in order for renovations to begin. After all had been moved and everything was calm, I began an addiction to watching shows like Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters, back when they were really fresh and new, and thought to myself, this is all rubbish, and found myself verbally saying such things out loud. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey man, don't you have the keys to 5696? He was right, I did. It was totally empty at night. Piquing my interest, I bought a tape recorder, old school, not a digital recorder, and went into the room the Marine told me about nearly a year ago, set it on top of the mirror above the sink, and locked the door. I left and locked the main and only entrance to Barrack 5696, and went back to Barrack 5704. The next day I let the Japanese painters do their job, as I did every day, and went back up to room 423 to collect the recorder off the top of the mirror. I returned back to my office in 5704 and listened to the tape. I spent nearly 4 hours listening to nothing, dead space. Then it happened. The wall locker in a room next to or adjacent to room 423 began slamming shut, open and shut, open and shut. This went on for a few minutes before other rooms started as well. After a few minutes from the first slamming wall locker, it seemed like the building had come alive. I was disturbed as I was the only individual with a key there. Any enlisted, even above me, would have to either ask me for the key or get one made. Once they did, I cannot fathom them wanting to slam wall lockers closed in the middle of the night, nor able to slam as many as I was hearing at the same time without 20 people at least to help. Yet I heard nothing but slamming wall lockers, no footsteps, no voices, no nothing. Knowing I placed the recorder and told no one, locked the door to the room and the main door to the barracks, creeped me out. No one had access to the barracks, nor knew of my intentions. I was convinced the ghost realm was real, just like Zack. I wanted to find what was out there. I wanted more proof of these spirits. Barracks 5696 was still under renovation, which meant it was completely empty at night, as there were no Japanese working crews then, and I held the only key. I convinced a buddy of mine, who I'll refer to as G, to come with me. We were going to conduct a live ghost hunting session. As exciting as it sounds, it wasn't. We never heard or saw anything. Being our first time, we felt weird talking to empty rooms of nothingness. We felt like nothing was there, but we were wrong. We would pick random rooms throughout the barracks, opening whichever room we felt at the time. As we walked down to the office of 5696, as it still had power and the office was functional, we joked that there was nothing there, and the banging wall locker still haunted my thoughts, and I wanted to know more. So I plugged in my digital recorder into the PC and started the exhausting journey of reviewing our files, one for each room. G was unconvinced as we entered rooms 3 or 4 on the recording. Then it happened. I said the usual, "Good evening, my name's Will," and G asked, "Can you tell us your names?" Clear as day, we get a response that said, "Get out." Neither of our voices, and we were within arm's reach of each other. This was the first of many threats I received, attempting to find the truth inside this barracks, a truth that came to manifest my home life, and made me never want to mess with the paranormal again. But I did. The allure was just too strong, and sometime later, the following events happened. I was living off base at the time with a girlfriend in a 10-story building. We were on the 10th floor, and everything seemed fine when we moved in. At least she never mentioned anything at this point. After a few weeks of doing EVPs nightly at 5696, she started to talk about this shadow person. I asked her where she saw it. There wasn't anything about it other than shadow. Was it threatening towards you? Or the usual stuff? She said it was always in the walk-in closet, had some color of glowing eyes, orange I think, and just creeped her out in general, but never tried to harm her. After hearing this, I started to freak out, as I was having some issues in 5696 that I never mentioned to her, but seems like I may have brought home, or perhaps it's been here the whole time. During this time frame, I started getting strange things on my EVPs. Not the usual get outs or hellos, but things that seemed far more intelligent and sinister. For example, I would always introduce myself. "Hello and good evening, my name is William. I only wish to communicate and mean you no harm." Besides my name, these entities should have known nothing else about me. Yet I was getting responses from them calling me by my childhood nickname, a nickname I hadn't used in years, and the other guys with me damn sure didn't. They once asked who my mother was. Now this may not have been specifically aimed towards me, if it wasn't followed up by a whisper saying my mother's name, which was a different voice from the first. I lost patches of hair on the back of my head that looked like fingerprints in a pattern, suggesting something had grabbed the back of it. Doctor said it was stress and gave me a steroid shot, but the hair refused to grow back for 3 months. 3 months just so happened to be the same time I grew concerned with the EVPs I was getting and threw in the towel. I locked 5696 up one final time and never returned there after dark. The hair that grew back was pitch black, and I have blonde hair, and stayed that way for many years. These days it's slightly lighter, maybe from sun exposure, but it's never been the same color it should be. Finally, I had a dream in a 10-story building right before I quit, and it was some kind of evil red creature laughing and prodding at me while it tortured me. When I woke and realized it was just a dream, I was relieved. Shortly after this dream of mine, which I never told anyone, my girlfriend had a similar dream. We went through a rough patch and I moved out the apartment, but she left shortly after, stating something was bothering our son in the middle of the night, something unseen. Today she's a minister and swears to me I brought something evil home all those years ago, and that it has been following her. When I was in high school in my senior year, I was around 5'3" and 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out he was cheating. Well, there were usually a few of us girls waiting there, but this day I was the only one. So I sat at a bench and had one headphone in and one out so that I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, 2 big men got out. I immediately messaged my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. He of course didn't reply, so I copy-pasted the same message to my cousin who was home, as I lived with my aunt and 2 cousins, who were unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make, the color, and plus it was 2 men, but I didn't get a response. When they got out of their car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late. As I stood by the street, the men walked up to me and I could feel their bad energy. One guy said hello and the other stood there staring at me. I just did a little smile and nod and looked away. Then the same guy asked how old I was, to which I didn't reply. I could tell the second guy was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then the first guy kept asking me questions like if I have a boyfriend, if I live close, and if I'm into narcotics. He then proceeded to tell me he had some and asked if I wanted it, and if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body, and I got the chills. The second one, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me that they just got back from Russia. But the way he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to get into their car, because they have things they think I'll want. I said no thank you, and trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either, and I would never get into someone's car that I didn't know. The first one then asked if I even had a car. To which I said no, but that my bus is almost here and that sorry I have to go. And by some sort of miracle the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer when they asked me my questions. But before the bus got to me, the first one handed me a card and said that he was a car shop dealer, and to call him sometime if I needed anything. He even said he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number to report it. So I took it and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and picked me up, and as soon as I got on I began crying. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and my body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what happened. When she looked around for the car, of course, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but she thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident, so that they could notify the school. She continued picking up all the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out, and so did campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men, and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions that the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card they gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security guard and said that he was going to call it, and act like my dad. So he did. I was on speaker and the first guy answered. I knew his voice as it was burnt into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card, and as soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again, but the phone was cut off, then eventually disconnected. They could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the cops, and they came to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. "She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to get her parents to get her." When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the car being used was a bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that finally picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked with him, and the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mum and cousin were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by two guys. The other kid stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out the car. The principal called me into the office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there that made me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out fast and they were caught. It was in fact those two guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year, and my boyfriend, now ex, also took me on several days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courage of the kids at her high school.